This year alone, I've spent over 300 hours inside Claude Code, not just experimenting, but building real products, running a paid community of business owners using it, and helping hundreds of people go from watching tutorials like this to actually building things that work inside their business. So it's safe to say I've gone deep on this. I've studied how the creator of Claude Code actually thinks about using it, tested different ways of structuring your workflows and agents, and watched what works and what completely breaks when you apply them to real projects. And here is what I've learned. There are hundreds of features, updates, and ways to use Claude Code, but only a small number of them are actually going to make a difference to your day-to-day. Most things either don't scale, or they fall apart the moment you try to use them in a real business. What's missing is something that takes you from absolute zero all the way to actually using this in your day-to-day at a high level. So that's what this video is. This is a full end-to-end breakdown of Claude Code, from opening the terminal for the first time to running multiple agents in parallel, building real systems while you can focus on higher level work. So whether you're completely new or you've already been using Claude Code inside your business, there will be sections in here that completely change how you approach it. Take your time with this one, and I'd recommend reviewing the chapters below and picking which ones to come back to. But by the end, you'll have a clear path from beginner to advanced without guessing what to learn next. So let's start at the very beginning. And before we install anything, I want to show you what we're actually building towards. Because if you've never seen Claude Code in action, the easiest way to understand is to compare it to the tools you're probably already using. So most people doing AI for their business right now are living inside one of three things: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or maybe you've gone a level deeper and you're using something like custom GPTs or Claude projects, and you're actually giving them some context about your business, like your brand voice, your tone, your customers. And all of those tools up until now have been brilliant, and I used to use them every day, but here's where they all hit the same wall and how Claude Code actually solves that. So all of these tools live in a browser tab. They can think for you, they can write for you, they can even plan for you, but they actually can't do anything for you. Sure, they can connect to a few of your apps, but mostly it's for simple tasks like checking your calendar or receiving your emails and reviewing those emails. But for anything more complicated than that, like asking ChatGPT to build you a landing page, it's going to give you the code in a chat window and you have to figure out what to do with that code. Or you ask Claude to organize your invoices and it's going to give you some advice on how to do it, but you still got to open every single folder yourself because it actually can't do it for you. Or you build a custom GPT for your brand voice and it writes great posts, but you're still copy pasting them into LinkedIn or Instagram one at a time every single time, and you're having to reprompt it to. So every single one of those is you copy and pasting the output. It all stops at the chat window. And Claude Code is the first AI tool I've used where that wall does not exist. And it's also not throwing you errors every 2 minutes that you're having to wait for it to fix. So with Claude Code, it lives on your computer. You describe what you want in plain English, same as you would in ChatGPT. But the difference is Claude actually goes and builds it. It's going to write the files, run the commands, create the folders that it needs, and it's even going to interact with your apps where you need it to. It's going to even test its results and then show you the outputs and where it's kept those. So despite the name, you don't actually need to know how to code at all. You don't need to know what a terminal is yet. You just need to be able to describe what you want. So let me show you some examples of what people are actually building today at a variety of experience levels, from complete beginners to current software engineers. So you can see if this has the potential to change your day-to-day workflows as well. Now, these are all members of my school community, but you don't need to be part of that to actually be building this amazing stuff. So firstly, Jane is a solopreneur who's building a writing and content business, but wants to stay focused on creating content. But to do so, she's realized that actually if she wants to remain a solopreneur and manage her time well, then she's going to need real systems running the back end. So she's jumping into Claude Code to build those agentic workflows for her one-person business to actually leverage her own time. Donovan's a little bit more experienced. He's not a developer, but he's been applying AI directly into live projects. So he's been doing things like contract reviews, payment checks, and reporting using AI. But something he's learned along the way is that the simplest setups consistently outperform the over-engineered ones. And in this course, we're going to go over a simple set of steps The 80-20, the 20% you need to know to get 80% of the value, similar to what Donovan knows here. Then we've got people building out their first personal websites or updating their websites. So we've got Ali here, who's built out his personal website. And then we've got Catherine here, built out her new website, took her a day and a half to get to an output that she was incredibly impressed with. Now, can you imagine a few years ago building out a website in a day and a half that actually genuinely looks really good? We've got Prakar, who built his first landing page in just 15 minutes. So with some simple prompts, which I'll show you today, you can actually build these things in as quick as 15 minutes as just that first MVP. Mark, who's built 2 apps in 3 weeks, 2 fully functional apps for his business in a grand total of 3 weeks that he thinks would have taken a month or 2 each alone otherwise. You can start to see and understand the power of using something like Claude Code when it can actually do the building for you. We've got Holger, who wants to improve his LinkedIn content, but keep the human touch. So he doesn't want generic AI slop, but he wants to use agentic workflows to augment the research so that he can still focus on making a good and valuable post, but in less time. We've got Oliver, who runs a LinkedIn outreach business, and he's automating personalized video messages on LinkedIn. And then we've got a few others like Martin, who's passing in all his business context. James, who's created his first ever skill document, and we'll come to what skills are later. And then Jiri, who's actually working on a complete company marketing hub for his business. And there are a ton of other use cases that people are either building inside the Agentic Academy or elsewhere that are extremely impressive from a variety of backgrounds. You don't need to be technical to actually start using this today. Some examples I'm going to show on screen, like landing pages and client sites we've already seen, internal dashboards from spreadsheet data to make it more visually appealing, content machines that actually generate content in your voice or extend your research, lead trackers, meeting prep and follow-up assistants, proposal generators, background automations that run whilst you're not there on a schedule, as well as full client-facing tools. The point is, if you can describe it, you can build it with Claude Code, but only if you follow the right steps. Now, some of you might already be using the Claude desktop app or even Claude Cowork. So I just wanted to touch on how this differs from Claude Code and why we're actually focusing on Claude Code for this course. So Cowork, for those that don't know, is Anthropic's newer tool. They launched it earlier this year and actually built it in a week, ironically, with Claude Code. So it's the friendlier looking sibling of Claude Code, the same engine underneath, but instead of a terminal interface, you get a clean visual interface. So they've built their own UI. So you can drag files in, you can connect it to your Notion, your Gmail, your Google Drive, and it can run tasks for you without ever opening up that terminal command line that we're going to look at today. So I guess that leads to the question, which is why are we doing this whole video on Claude Code instead of Cowork? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first is that Claude Code is more powerful at the moment. So right now, everything Cowork can do, Claude Code can do, as well as more. So all of the real building blocks that we're going to cover in this video, like skills, hooks, sub-agents, MCP servers, planning frameworks, they all live in Claude Code first. And then Cowork is designed to just inherit the simpler bits. So if you understand what's going on in Claude Code, you can absolutely go and use Claude Cowork. So second, once you understand Claude Code, Cowork becomes totally obvious. So the skills that we're going to build in Claude Code will work in Cowork. You can port them over. And things like the Claude.md files, which we write in Claude Code, can all be put in Claude Cowork too. But I just want to stress that learning Claude Code isn't the harder path at all. It's the path that's going to unlock both for you. If you know how to use Claude Code, you know how to use Claude Cowork in the desktop app. If you can learn how everything works underneath, then you can actually use the UI. And if you can describe what you want clearly, as we've already mentioned, Claude Code can build it. And that is the entire core skill that this video teaches. Everything from here on is about getting better at describing, planning, and giving Claude the right context at the right time so that you can build the kind of stuff that used to require a developer several weeks to do in just a few days. So let's get you set up, and I'll do Mac and Windows side by side. So skip to whichever chapter applies to you in the chapters below. We're going to start next with the Mac setup. And what we're going to do is run through all of these commands. They're installed globally on our VS Code folder, which we'll come to in a bit. But what this essentially means is they're available system-wide. So when we install something, we're trying to install them system-wide so that we can run them from VS Code. So we're going to need to install a few things. And firstly, we're going to need to install VS Code. So VS Code is effectively our development environment. So we're going to click on the link inside the guide there, and it will open up this open source AI code editor. It's going to give you a download button for macOS. We're going to hit that download, and it's going to start downloading in the background. And once that runs, we're going to effectively open that up and start installing VS Code first. So we're going to open up the installer and drag it into our applications folder, and that's now going to copy into applications. And that's effectively all we need to do for VS Code. Once it's in our applications folder, we're not going to open it just yet because we need to install some other things first. We're going to go back to the full course resources, and then we're going to install Git. So usually Macs come with Git pre-installed. So in fact, we are going to open the VS Code terminal. So we'll go into our Visual Studio Code. We will maximize the screen and hit in the top bar, terminal, new terminal. We're just going to copy this command, git -- version, to see if we already have it pre-installed. And you can see that I've got git version 2.52.0. If you don't have it installed, your Mac should prompt you to install. So you're just going to follow along the prompt and let it install, and then it should be done. If at any point you're struggling to follow any of these instructions, go to ChatGPT or Claude, copy in and tell it exactly what you're trying to install and your operating system like Mac OS, and it will give you troubleshooting guides. So Git is effectively a save system for code. So it's a version control system. Developers use it to track changes to files over time, and it's completely free and widely used. And for Claude Code, we effectively need it because our developer tools and packages often rely on it in the background. So now we're going to go and install Claude Code inside the terminal inside VS Code. So we're going to copy and paste this command here, this full command starting in curl and ending in bash. We're going to go back to our terminal, type in that command and hit run there. And you can see this is installing in this file directory, Simon MacBook Air 5. And it will take a few seconds to start loading the install. What we're effectively fetching is the files for install from this URL here. And we've come up with installation complete. However, it said in the setup notes, native installation exists, but this file path, .local/bin, is not in your path. So it's telling us to run this command, echo export path home, which is also, if I copy that, the command that should be down here as well if you need it. So whatever command it says to run, we're going to run that command to make sure that we can actually access Claude. Because if we try now to just access Claude, let's try that first and show you the error. We get no such file or directory. So let's try and run that command. And now it's successfully run. We can see that because we've got a blank space. I'm just going to clear that and try and run Claude again. And now, instead of no such file or directory, it's now linked us to Claude. And what we're able to do is actually go through the configuration settings. So I'm going to leave it on dark mode. I recommend we go Claude account with subscription, because actually we will use less with our Pro subscription or Max subscription than we will with our Anthropic API. So if you choose to use API, you probably end up spending more money. So we're going to go Claude account with subscription. And what that's going to do is open up a page where we can log into our Claude as well. Then we're going to see a page like this. Claude Code would like to connect to your Claude chat account. We're going to authorize that, and it should then be ready. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code now, you can see login successful. We're going to press enter to continue. It tells us a little bit about the security note. So Claude can make mistakes and only use it with files you can trust. So we're going to press enter. We're going to use the recommended settings. And yes, we trust this folder because there's nothing in this folder at the moment. And there we now have access to Claude or Claude Code. So we can type in hello. You can see it starts thinking and then gets back to us with an answer. And what we can do now is just hit enter to continue down here, and we can continue chatting to Claude. Now there's one other thing called Node.js that we want to install. And Node.js will effectively install or come bundled with two things that we're going to need later on in the course. So the first is Node Package Manager, or NPM. And you can think of this as like an app store for developer tools. So when we need to install something like an MCP server or a plugin, we're going to run something like npm install something. So we effectively need this later on in the course. So we're going to install it now. And the Node Version Manager lets us switch between different versions of Node.js. So we're going to go to this link here now, nodejs.org, and download it from the macOS operating system. We're going to run that installer on the default settings, and then we're going to check if everything is installed correctly by running node -- version and npm -- version. So let's go now and run the macOS installer. And again, we're going to download it. We're going to run through with all the default installation types, and we can see that that is now installed correctly. We can move the installer to the bin. And now we need to go back to VS Code, copy these commands, node -- version and npm -- version. We need to Control C, or actually, double Control C or kill the terminal up here and start a new terminal to make sure that we've come out of Claude Code, which we're entering these commands in the terminal, not inside Claude Code. So we're going to hit or type in clear here. And then I'm just going to copy in node -- version. We should see a version number pop up if it's installed correctly. I'm going to try npm -- version now. And I can see that we've got an npm version 11.9.0. Usually if it's not installed, it will give you a command to run, and you just run that inside here to find the correct thing as well. And that is effectively it. We can now rerun Claude here, and we can see that Claude Code is now available, and we can start talking about the different files and file types that we're going to start using in the course. So we're now going to go through the setup of Claude Code on a Windows device. You've got all the instructions in the module here. And what we're going to do is effectively run through these instructions, and you have the copy paste commands down here. We're going to run through it on the PDF. So you have the PDF, the installation commands down here. It's going to contain all of the installation commands that we're going to run through now. And there are a few things that we need to install. They're going to be installed to our global VS Code folder, which we'll talk about it later on in the course. But essentially this means that it can be accessed from anywhere in our system. And make sure to run through these in order. This is assuming you've never installed these before. If you have these installed, then you can skip ahead and ignore this. But first up, we need to install VS Code. So we're just going to click on the link inside there. And it's going to take us to this open source AI code editor, or effectively our development environment. So what we're going to do is hit the download for Windows button. It's going to start downloading up here, and then we're going to start running that. So all we need to do is run through all of the installation steps, and don't open up VS Code yet. So I'm going to open that file, and we can see it down here. So we accept the agreement. Make sure you flick through and accept that agreement. Do we want to create a desktop icon? Do we want to add open with code action? So adding the open with code action just means when we're exploring a file, we can right click on it and say open with code, and Visual Studio Code will open that up. Register code as an editor, add to path. That's fine. Let's go through and install with those default settings. And what we're going to do is just untick launch Visual Studio Code. We don't want to open it yet because we want to install some other things that we need to restart Visual Studio Code anyway. So we're going to click finish on there. We're going to go back to the full course resources, and we need to now install Git. So Git it's our version control system. So developers use it to track changes to files over time, and it's completely free and widely used. So we need it for Claude Code because we're going to use a service called NPM, which is effectively an app store for developer tools. So NPM relies on Git to fetch the files. So without Git installed, we can't download things from NPM. So let's go to either the link up here or down here. Both are the same. And we're going to run the installer and accept the default settings again. So we're going to click on the top link here for the latest version Git for Windows. That's going to download. And again, we're going to run through with the default settings on Git. So we're going to open that file. Yes, we want to allow it to make changes. We're going to run through the license, install it in the default settings, and we'll leave these as the default settings too, and run through. So all of the default settings there. And now it is running and installing. And we're just going to untick that and click finish on Git. So let's go back to the instructions. We're now going to install Claude Code. So we now need to open a Visual Studio Code. So we can come down here to the search bar, find Visual Studio Code by typing in VS. And what we're going to do is just open that now. And your page will look a little bit like this. And we're going to click away from this welcome. So we're going to open up a new terminal here in the top bar. Now we're going to install Claude Code. So we're going to come back to the instructions. So once we've opened a new terminal, we're going to copy and paste this line here from the instructions. Control C. We're going to go back to Visual Studio Code. And in our terminal, we're going to just Control V that inside there. What that's going to do is install Claude.ai or Claude Code into our system. Once you hit enter, it's going to take a moment or so to load. So just bear with it whilst it processes the information we've passed in. And you can see it's now setting up Claude Code and installing everything it needs to install. We can get rid of the chat window on the right. We're just dealing inside the terminal here. And if you get an execution policy error, then you can just run this command in here. But to check if it's installed correctly, we can run Claude directly in the terminal. So if we run Claude here, just type in Claude and hit enter, we will see if it's installed correctly. And then you can see at the moment, it says the term Claude is not recognized as the name of the CMD let. So what this is actually saying is that our environment variable does not exist. So what we need to actually do is go and set up our environment variable. So I'm just going to copy this here, which has my path that I need to add to the environment variable. And we can just follow these instructions. So system properties, environment variables, edit user path,
new and add the path above, and then restart the terminal. So it tells us exactly what we need to do here. So if we go to the search bar and we type in environment variables, you can see edit the system environment variables. We can open that. We will click on environment variables down here. We'll go to path and we're going to go to edit. And what we're going to do is just add a new environment variable in here. We're going to paste exactly what we had before. So this will just be c/users/your username /.local/bin. And we're just going to hit OK on that. We're going to hit OK again, close this all down. And what we need to do now is just restart VS Code. So make sure you shut down VS Code. We're going to open it back up. And now we're just going to type in Claude again. Now we've added the environment variable, and you can see we've now got welcome to Claude. So it starts up with a quick menu where we can choose, do we want dark mode, light mode? I'm just going to leave it on the conventional dark mode. And then how do we want to log in? So do we want to log in with our subscription, which is the way I'd recommend you do, or do you want to do it through the API, which is going to cost you more in the long run? So I'd highly recommend doing it through the Claude account with subscription. And what that's going to do is either give you a link to open up and log into your Claude, or it's going to open it up directly for you. So we're going to continue, we're going to sign into our Claude, and then we'll come back in a moment. And then it's going to bring you to a page that says Claude Code would like to connect to your Claude chat account. We're going to hit authorize, and that should say, okay, we're all done there. We're going to accept the cookies. We'll go back to Claude, and it should say something like login successful, press enter to continue. And it gives you a few security notes. Claude can make mistakes, and only use it with files you trust. We're going to hit enter. We're going to use the recommended settings, and then yes, we trust this folder because there's nothing in the folder at the moment. And we can type something now saying hello. And now that we've connected it to our Claude account, you can see that it tinkers for a little bit and then comes back with an answer, which suggests that Claude is actually working. Now we've had a Windows security message saying, do we want to block the features of Visual Studio Code? And we're just going to make sure that we allow those features. We can hit enter to continue, and now we can start chatting with Claude. Now we're chatting in an individual instance, and we'll talk about doing that. But what we can do if we want to just kill the terminal and start it up again, we can hit this bin button up here, or we can hit Control-C twice in a row, and you'll see that it now reverts back to this folder again, and we can actually just restart it back up by hitting Claude again. So we can exit using the bin, or Control-C, Control-C. Now there's one other thing that I'd highly recommend you install now. It's not necessarily to get Claude Code running, but it will be useful for the Node packages we launch later on. So it's called Node.js, and what we're going to do is just go to nodejs.org, download. We're going to make sure we're downloading it with the right settings here. And we're going to download the Windows installer.msi. That's going to download. We're going to open that file and run through again the default settings on the setup here. We'll allow it to make changes to our device, and it's going to go through and validate the install and install that. I'm going to hit finish, and we now need to close and reopen VS Code so it picks up the new installation. So we need to close and reopen again. But the two things it comes with, the first is Node Package Manager. So like we said, it's that app store for developer tools. So a thing called NPM. When we install something, we often run npm install something. So that just means that now we've got node.js installed. All npm commands should now work. And then Node Version Manager lets you switch between different versions of node.js. You won't need to use that necessarily, but it's a handy tool and it comes installed as well. So to check everything's installed correctly, what we can do is just run these two commands, node-version and npm-version. But first, we need to make sure that we restart. We go and close VS Code. We open it back up and we open a new terminal if one hasn't opened already. And what we're going to do is just run it, not in Claude Code, inside the terminal here. So we're going to just copy paste node-version, and you can see it comes back with a version number. And then we're going to do the same with npm-version. And we've got an error come back for npm-version that's saying it cannot be loaded because running scripts is disabled on the system. For more information, see the execution policies. So let's troubleshoot that one now. Copy that, open up a new Claude or ChatGPT window, and actually just get started by switching it to a powerful model like Opus 4.6, saying trying to install npm on Windows inside VS Code, and just be specific. Have installed node.js correctly, but getting this error when I run npm-version. And then we're going to just paste in the error and run that. And that is usually a really good way to troubleshoot these. So it's come back saying the quickest fix is to run this command in your VS Code terminal. So actually this is a command that I'll add in below for the npm-version. So this will be present in your version. But what we can do is just copy this command from here, take it back to the terminal and run that. And we can see it successfully run there. And now if we run npm-version, you can see 11.9.0. So we've effectively set the execution policy to happen on this current user. And that is everything we need to install. So like I said, I will add that in below this npm-version, so you can just copy paste that command line if you come to it.
Now that we're set up, one more quick thing before we build. Claude Code uses a file format called Markdown. And you're going to see files ending in .md or .markdown absolutely everywhere. So you're going to have a Claude.md file. All of your skill files are going to be skill.md, planning documents, /commands, all of it. So let me show you what Markdown actually is, because it sounds technical, but it's really easy to understand, and you'll see exactly why we use it. It's effectively a way of just writing formatted text using plain text. So we've got here a hashtag, which represents the highest level of heading, or a heading 1. 2 hashtags is heading 2. 3 hashtags is heading 3. Fairly simple to follow. We've got bold text with the asterisks there. You might have seen that, and we used that before. We've got bullet points represented by dashes, links represented by these square brackets, and then the link inside parentheses, block quotes, inline code. That's pretty much it. And you can understand exactly what this represents if you take that and you copy paste it to, let's say, a Notion page, and you match the style of the Notion page. You can see that this has converted it into a Markdown that we readily recognize as just formatted text. So heading 1 becomes the biggest header, heading 2, heading 3. We've got the bold text, the italic text, the bullet points, the numbered lists. The link now is a link. Block quote, inline code. You understand now that actually this is just a way in plain text to represent this effectively, which is really easy and intuitive for us to understand. So all the documents are going to be written in this way, and we're effectively using a few symbols to format or mark things up. This is how it shows up for humans, but also AI actually readily reads Markdown really, really well, so it can understand the structure. So if you have a document that's headings, subheadings, bold text, etc., then usually the large language model underneath, or the LLM, has actually been trained on that. So it understands exactly the structure of your document that you're passing in. So it knows what's grouped together. It knows where one section ends, another one begins, etc. And you don't need to memorize any of this. Actually, AI will start writing the Markdown for you. You just need to understand that when you look inside a file, it'll be represented like this. Exactly the same in which I've got a README file. You can see that everything we've gone through so far is represented by these hashtags. If we go to section 3, we've got a second header that actually in the preview shows up as this second header here. So let's move on and actually start building out something now, because there's no point jumping into all of the best practices, the Claude.md files, the skills, the planning frameworks, before you've actually understood what Claude Code is like from the box without any additions to it. Because the best way to understand this and the tools to use on top of it is by actually seeing what it can do straight out the box before we do any advanced stuff that adds to the functionality. And you'll see that it's already pretty powerful out the box, but it's not going to blow your mind. Now, through the rest of the course, we're going to be building one project together, and it's going to be a content repurposing engine. So imagine that you drop in a piece of source content. So this could be a social media post from someone you like, or from you. You drop in a video transcript, or a blog post that you've written, notes from a podcast that you like. So drop in anything. You're going to get out a LinkedIn post, an X thread, or a newsletter draft. But the key here is going to be all in your voice, all saved as drafts to review. And most importantly, the human stays in and the AI slop stays out. And we'll come back to the importance of that in a bit. But instead of doing just a throwaway demo, our first build is going to just be the first version of this content repurposing engine. So it's going to be the dumbest, simplest possible version that you can build with zero setup, zero additional features in just 5 minutes or less. And then through the rest of the video, we're going to layer on every concept you need to take it from a thing that produces okay and AI-like output to a system that genuinely sounds like you wrote it, but took you only a few seconds. So what we're going to do first is just go into Visual Studio Code, make sure we got the folders open here. We're going to start a new folder. So we're going to open folder. I'm going to open one I'm already using, which is my Claude Code course folder, but you can put this anywhere. You can put this on desktop, wherever. So click into a new folder, but once you've got a folder sorted, just open that folder directly. That's going to open inside here. You're going to have a blank interface here, no README like I do. This is just for demonstration. We're going to then enter our first prompt, which is there's a transcript at transcript.txt, which is just a text file. Read it and then turn it into a LinkedIn post, an X thread, a short newsletter intro, save them as separate files in a /drafts folder. So we're going to take that prompt, and you'll have access to these resources and the prompts down below in the description. And what we're going to do is set up the transcript.txt file for it to read. So we're not worrying about putting any folders in or anything like that at the moment. We're just giving it access to a transcript.txt file, and then we'll open up Claude Code and see what it can produce. So we're going to go to my YouTube or any YouTube channel. We're going to pick a video. Let's say this video about the Agentic OS UI here. We're going to copy that link, and we're actually going to go to Google and just type in YouTube to transcript. We'll go on any of these links at the top, and we're going to paste the URL of the video or anything that you want to turn into a post inside here. We're going to get the free transcript, and you can see the transcripts down here. We're going to copy that transcript. We're going to go back and actually start a new file across here. So we'll hit the new file button. We'll hit transcript.txt, and then that will open on the window up here. And what we're going to do is just paste in that transcript. So it's literally just going to be the entire transcript pasted into this transcript.txt file. You probably see where we're going with this. We're going to copy this, and we're going to go up to the top and open a new terminal. I'm on Mac, so it might look a little bit different if you're on Windows. I'm going to open a new terminal, and that terminal, you'll notice, is in the folder I opened, so Claude Code course. And what we can do is now open Claude, and the simplest way to do that is just running Claude now that you've got it installed. Yes, I trust this folder. There's basically nothing in it. And now we're going to just enter the prompt into Claude. I'm going to paste that prompt in, and I'm going to run that. So there's a transcript at transcript.txt, read it, then turn it into a LinkedIn post, an X thread, a short newsletter intro, save them as separate files in a /drafts folder. So on the left-hand side here, we should see as it starts to build out the LinkedIn post, the X thread, the short newsletter, it will come up with a drafts folder where we can go and review those folders. Now, if you've got no skills or anything installed in the background in your global folder, i.e. where you install Claude Code, then Claude Code will just use whatever model it's using to actually build these out. And then we can see the quality out the box of Claude Code before we start adding anything onto it. So we've got some bash commands that we need to approve here. So we're going to go yes and always allow access. And you can see it's now created this drafts folder. So it was asking for our approval to actually create that folder. And you can see it's now writing a LinkedIn post inside the drafts. And we can see that it is generated it as a .md file as we expected. We've got an X thread.md, and then we should have a newsletter intro.md as well, based on that transcript of the video. So all three drafts are saved in /drafts, the LinkedIn post, the X thread, and the newsletter intro. So we can actually go in and see any of these. And inside here, you can see they're all written in plain text. It's got no formatting at all. And what we can do to just read it a little bit better is open in preview. So I'm going to use Command Shift and V, but you can right click and open in preview sometimes too. For example, the LinkedIn post, Claude Code agents have gotten really good. So good, in fact, the agents aren't the bottleneck anymore. You are. So the video transcript that I pasted in was about Claude Code agents no longer being the bottleneck. The person operating them was now the bottleneck. So they need a new interface to actually manage multiple sessions and multiple tasks, especially for business owners. Here's what I mean. You start a task, Claude's running autonomously for 5 to 10 minutes. Your mind wanders, you open another terminal, then another. Before you know it, you've got 5 tabs open and you're clicking between them, going, which one was building my landing page? Every time you switch, you lose context. So this is okay. It doesn't really sound like me at all. And it's pretty wordy as well. Like there's a lot here. And I'm not really sure what the call to action is. It's just kind of informational and very long compared to what I'd usually write on LinkedIn. We've then got the newsletter intro and the X thread, which breaks it down into 5 different stages inside here. So we basically set up Claude Code in a fresh project folder. I didn't give it any context about my business, any context about my business goals. I haven't told it how to write. It knows nothing about me personally. And then we've basically given it a transcript to write about. I mean, the great thing about this was we actually produced 3 drafts. They were completely separated and saved in a folder. Took about 2 minutes of work, and it was a single sentence and a transcript. So I'm going to be honest, I was actually more impressed than I thought I'd be with this post out the box. So much so that I had to ask if it used any skills or any hooks or any of my previous libraries that I've installed, or was it just Claude Code out the box? But it said, actually, no, it's just taken the transcript and the tone of the voice in the transcript and created a LinkedIn post and a newsletter intro and an X thread from that voice. But the point of the rest of the course is to teach you how to take this tool, Claude Code, and this content repurposing system and turn it into something that produces work you'd actually be proud to put your name on, and that's repeatable. It sounds like you, not ChatGPT. It's going to make you work faster and produce the quality that you were always producing before. And the whole goal here is not to remove you from the process, it's to remove you from the grunt work, to go and do the research. It's going to do the formatting for you, the platform specific rewriting, and all the busy work stuff that you don't actually want to do so that you can stay in the parts that actually matter and the parts you actually enjoy. So you're still picking the topic, you still review every output, you still hit publish. So it's just Claude is going to handle that bit in the middle that I personally don't enjoy doing, all of the admin and grunt work. So when done right, your content should sound more like you, not less like you, because instead of starting from a blank page every single time, like we did just now, you're going to start from your own ideas, your own voice, which is going to be embedded, your own examples, and we're going to keep all the human elements inside the content we produce and keep that AI slop out. So let me give you a quick preview of how we're going to improve this. The first thing we're going to add is context. Right now, Claude knows nothing about you, nothing about your business, your audience, the voice you use, the words that you would never use, the M dashes, the hooks like this one that you'd never write because it doesn't sound like you. And we're going to teach all of that to Claude once in a file that it reads at the start of every session. So when you ask for a LinkedIn post, it's not going to guess what you want. It already knows how you write. It's seen previous examples and can leverage that. Now, the second thing we're going to add is skills. So skills are like little folders of expertise that you give to Claude. They're process documents, standard operating procedures. So you might have something like a content repurposer skill that knows your tone, your structure, your best performing posts as examples. You might have a proposal generator skill that follows your exact format for client proposals. And the importance here is once a skill exists, you don't have to re-explain your context. Claude is just going to know how to do that thing the way that you always want it done. And it's going to pick it up automatically when you ask it a question. Then the third thing we'll talk about is personality, what we call agents. So agents are specialists that you can spawn for specific jobs. A research agent is going to dig into your topic, a copy reviewer that checks every draft against your voice. And you're going to see how to use agents and skills together and when to use which. And then the fourth thing, and this is the biggest one, is planning. So right now our engine works because it's just a small task that we've asked it to do. So we literally gave it one transcript, 3 drafts in the output. But if you try to use this for an actual business use case, think like a multi-week content campaign where you pull your source content from Notion, you generate drafts for 5 different platforms, you're scheduling posts actually on those platforms and not just copy pasting. Like this would completely fall apart. That is too complex for Claude Code out the box. Claude would just build it with its own assumptions and you'd end up with more rework than if you just planned it out in the first place. So Claude has a memory window, a limited amount of stuff that you can actually hold in Claude's head at any one time. So the more you ask it to do in a single prompt, the more that window is going to get filled up. And you can see that by the green box on the bottom of the terminal here. And the more that window fills up, the worse the quality is going to get. So by the end of a long, complex prompt, like building out that multi-stage campaign, it's going to make decisions based on context that it can no longer find. And this is something that we call context rot. So the fix for this is not to ask Claude to be better. It's to actually just give it a plan where it feeds in context at the right time. So we're breaking down big projects into small, focused tasks, each running in their own clear context, exactly like we do when we're breaking down a big task for ourselves. And that's what frameworks like Plan Mode and GSD do, and we'll get to those later. So we've done our first build, and you can actually do everything I've just shown you today right now by yourself. You don't need me to tell you how to do that. You've got Claude Code installed, you've got a prompt, off you go. But to be honest, you'd end up exactly where most people end up. As soon as you start to do those bigger tasks, you start getting frustrated, you're producing okay-ish content that sounds like every other AI tool you've ever used. And it's going to start to make you wonder why everyone's so excited about this thing. But every concept that we cover from this point onwards, context, skills, agents, planning, is what's going to separate the people who play with Claude Code for a weekend from the people who are actually running real business systems on it. This is the foundation that's going to make a complete change to the way you work with Claude Code. You're going to be producing content that actually sounds like you. You're going to remove that grunt work without removing the human elements. You're going to learn how to do things on a repeatable basis, so you no longer have to repeat yourself with every conversation you have with AI. So if that sounds good, we're going to continue with the content repurposing engine, but we're going to make the output 10 times better whilst teaching you all the fundamentals you'll need to know to go and apply this to any project. It doesn't need to be content based. It's just this is a use case that's applicable to a lot of people, and you'll start to see how you can then apply this to your exact use cases, because we're going to demonstrate exactly how we'd use it. So we're going to take that one sentence prompt that we used before, which gave us that pretty sloppy output, although I was more impressed than I thought. We're going to add some context. We're going to add skills or folders of expertise. We're going to add personality to it, and we're going to add planning frameworks for larger builds. And at the end of it, you're going to get some content that sounds like you wrote it, not like AI wrote it. And it's going to be completely repeatable, and you're going to be able to apply this to any project. It doesn't have to be content repurposing. The same framework can be applied to any project that you do going forwards with Claude Code. So before we move on to building out those foundations, you need to understand something first around permissions. You probably noticed during that first build that Claude already asked for a permission for doing something as simple as actually creating a folder or creating posts within that folder in our folder structure. So if you don't get this right up front, it's going to ask permissions for every single file, every command it runs, every change it wants to make to a file. So there are kind of three approaches that you can follow for permissions. The first is the complete nuclear option, which is what people tend to use when they're starting out. And this is Claude -- dangerously skip permission. So when you open Claude, you would literally run this command in a new terminal like this. And it would basically mean that it can do anything on your system. It can delete files, and it's not even going to ask your permission before it does so. Or you can start in the total other side of the spectrum, which we've seen, where you start with no permission settings, and it basically asks you for every permission, whether that's editing a file, reading a file, it's going to ask you every time whether it can do so. The second approach, which is actually combined with the third approach, is pre-approve the safe stuff, but also try to deny the dangerous stuff. So we want it to be able to actually read and edit our files in this directory, but we don't want it to do package installs that we don't know about, read our sensitive keys, or remove our files. So what we can do is actually create what's called a settings.json file. And you would literally come up here, type in settings.json. You can see I've already got one installed in here. And that is effectively a JSON file that Claude reads before it approves anything, or before it is able to actually go and do any tasks. And this is a config that I recommend, and I'll leave it down below with the free resources for this course. We're allowing certain actions like reading files and folders, running tests, running dev servers, Git operations, where we're going to store all of our version control, reading, editing, and writing files, but we're not going to allow it to install packages without our permission. We're not going to allow it to delete files and folders without our permission. We're not going to allow it to send external data to the web without our permission. And of course, we're not going to allow it to read our sensitive files and secrets and make amendments to those. So what you can do is quite literally copy all of this, put it inside your settings.json file, and then just remove everything in green. So we're going to remove all of this text, because otherwise it's not going to be a valid format there. So you'll end up with basically an allow and deny list that allows it to do certain things, but also stops it and asks it for your permission to do other things too. Now I wanted to quickly flash up the sneak preview of auto mode, which Claude Code has brought out. So you can go to this link and you can see that Claude Code is effectively working on a similar thing, which will be better than putting it in your own settings.json. It's not available on Pro or Max plans right now. It's in research preview, but they basically use a classifier to say, we're going to block certain things by default, like downloading and executing code externally, sending sensitive data to external endpoints, all the things you wouldn't want to do, but we're actually going to allow certain things by default, like local file operations in that working directory, sending credentials to their matching API and not to APIs that don't match that, and certain things. So it's basically going to auto classify what it thinks it should be able to do without your permission and stop by default the more dangerous activities. So you can choose an approach from these, whichever suits the way that you work, but I'd highly recommend going with pre-approving the safe stuff and denying the dangerous stuff. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about the most important file inside your Claude project folder, which is the Claude.md. And with all of these foundations that we're now going to add on, we're going to talk about the foundation, exactly what it is, and then we're going to apply it to our content repurposing system so that you can see how you'd actually apply this to a use case. And you don't need to be building out a content repurposing system for yourself. This is just an example that's very relatable to a lot of business owners who produce content. These foundations are going to be applicable to any project, and hopefully you can take away the same concepts and you can apply them to exactly your use cases too. So if you only learn one thing from this entire course, make it this, and that's that Claude.md is the file that actually makes Claude understand your business. We create a Claude.md file per project, and the context inside that file is going to be passed down to all of the sub projects. So if you have a Claude.md file set up in your global directory where Claude Code is installed, any rules inside there will be passed down to any subfolders of projects inside Claude Code. So it inherits from the parent. Now you can keep your Claude.md for a specific project. In our case, we'll build one out for specifically a content repurposing engine, or you can have a more generic Claude.md that gives it the overall rules that your Claude projects, plural, need to follow. But what you must know about Claude.md is every time you start a Claude Code session inside this project folder, the first thing that Claude is going to do is look for the file called Claude.md. And if it finds one, it's going to read it. So all of the information we put in there is going to be loaded into the context before the message that we send to Claude. And you can think of it as like an extension on Claude Code's brain for the entire session. And if you change the Claude.md, you restart the session and then that's reloaded into your Claude Code instance. So it can have things like links to your brand voice, what tech stack you use, your process, and your gotchas. But there's kind of 5 key questions that I think a good Claude.md should cover. And this makes it nice and simple so that you can create this for any project. And we're also going to use Claude Code to create our Claude.md for our content repurposing engine. So the 5 questions are, firstly, what is this project? Or what is this folder directory? So this should be succinct. It's like not a manifesto. This project is a content repurposing engine where we can paste in some source context and it spins out for multiple platforms in my brand voice, a post per platform. How do I run things? So where should files actually go? Should they be put in this drafts folder like we had before? Which folders matter? Which context should I relate to? So you wouldn't have, for example, and we'll come to this in a moment, all of your brand voice in the Claude.md file. It's too much information. But what you would do is say, actually refer to this extra file if you need to see my brand voice. What patterns do I follow? And when we say I here, we're talking about Claude Code. So this could be the brand voice stuff. It could be the rules and the non-negotiables. I want to make sure that every time it always outputs 2 variations per platform or something like that could be a rule. What's weird here, so the gotchas and the counterintuitive stuff, and this is the stuff that actually Boris Cherny, the creator of Claude Code, calls the gotchas section. And this is like after the fact. So when you start seeing results and you're not getting the expected results that you want, you add in the gotchas afterwards. So it goes through that list and never forgets to do those specific things. And then of course we need almost like a process map, the instruction set, step by step, the standard operating procedure of how do we work. So what's the process? What do we have before in our inputs? What do we get during? Or what do we produce during? And what are our outputs afterwards? So you can consider this a framework from which you can build any Claude.md file. And you can think of it kind of like onboarding a new freelancer into your business. You don't want to re-explain your business every single time they sit down. So the Claude.md effectively is your one-pager on everything you want them to know and all the rules you want them to stick to. But the trick is keeping it tight and keeping it under around 200 lines, because any more than that, and we start overloading the context of Claude Code, and it's going to be harder for it to recall all of those rules. Now, I said we'd come to the point don't dump trick, which is basically don't put all of your context in the Claude.md. It's not designed to work like that. Don't paste 50 example posts. Don't paste your entire content strategy. Do, however, point Claude to where those files live. So we should have something that says, every time you write a post, you need to refer to my full brand guide. And that full brand guide is in the /references folder /brand voice. So we might have a folder in here that's, references. And then inside that, we have a file that's brandvoice.md, and we'll come to this in a moment. So basically, think of Claude.md as like your table of contents with the process document that Claude is going to follow for this project. So let's start creating our own Claude.md for our content repurposing engine. And we've got this prompt that we've predefined that can effectively answer these 5 questions simply by just saying, what is this? How does it work? Refer to my voice rules, give some platform formatting rules, give some gotchas, and give the workflow. Now, it's going to ask me for my voice rules using something that's built into Claude Code, which we haven't seen yet, which is the Ask User Questions feature. And as it sounds, it's going to come back and quiz us on the voice rules, and then it's going to extract those voice rules and put them elsewhere. But one thing we need to add to this is to make sure that actually it takes the rules that we've spoken about, make sure it's under 200 lines, and then any additional information like voice rules is going to sit in a separate document that it's going to refer to. So we're going to grab that prompt from down there. We're going to open up a new terminal. We've started Claude. We're going to paste in that and then tell it exactly what we just said. So we're going to run that. And we've added the additional information, and you're going to see it now come back and ask us about our brand voice. Instead of asking it to come up with questions about your brand voice, inside the Agentic Academy, we have a separate document where we go through and ask you structured questions to define your brand voice. So you can do this in more detail, but we're just doing this for demonstration's sake. And you can see it's now can see the project structure. Let me create the Claude.md file with a placeholder for your voice rules. Then it's going to ask us for those. So Claude.md is created. It's got 55 lines. We can actually go in and review that now. We can preview Claude.md. We've got Content Repurposing Engine, a tool that transforms long-form content into platform-specific drafts for LinkedIn, X, and newsletters. And like I said, you can have a Claude.md per project, like this Content Repurposing Engine, or you can keep it more high level. And actually, we just have this Content Repurposing Engine as a skill, which we'll come to in a few minutes. And then actually the Claude.md is just your operating system for your business that executes these certain skills. We've got a how it works section. We've got a voice and brand rules section. All voice and tone guidelines live in the references/brandvoice.md. Right now, it's an empty document. It's got the platform formatting rules. So for LinkedIn, for X, for newsletter. But as we start to build out this Claude.md, all of these platform formatting rules, for example, should only be referred to and loaded into context whenever needed. So we would actually tell it to strip out the platform formatting rules and say, when you're creating for LinkedIn, refer to the references platform formatting guide, LinkedIn section. So you see how you start to really strip things back. So this is like a standard operating procedure for the only information that we should be loading in, and any surplus information Claude Code can load in at the time it needs it, and then offload also, which is the important part, when it doesn't need it, and therefore it doesn't take up loads of context. And also it means Claude Code can stay on track because it's focused per the step it's taking. But you can see now it's come back with some questions using this Ask User Questions feature around our tone, our anti-voice, any stories, and any voice rules. So what best describes your brand voice tone? We'll go casual, like talking to a friend. What should your writing never sound like? It should never sound corporate. So I'm hitting spacebar to do this. It should never sound overly academic, and should never definitely sound generic AI slop-like. Stories. How do you typically use personal stories or examples? I sometimes use them to illustrate a point. And share your full voice rules or any additional details you'd like in the brand voice doc. And I'm just going to keep it generic at the moment, but you can paste in examples of previous work that you've done, and it can extract those voice rules for you. But I'm going to say use what I've selected above. And in fact, inside Claude Projects, I have a tone of voice brief that I'm just going to copy paste. I'm going to hit enter and submit those answers. So we've used that Ask User Questions, and now what it's going to do is extract stuff around my brand voice and put it into the brandvoice.md reference file, so that it can actually come back and reference those. And then we will ask it to put the platform formatting rules inside a separate reference document that's pointed to by the Claude.md. And when we run a second task like this, you'll see it appear in gray. It's actually not able to run at the same time. And what we're effectively doing is queuing this. So as soon as this task is finished, which you can now see it is, we can see that it is now running this second task. So it's got the Claude.md that's been created. It's also now done the references brand voice document, which we can see. And you can see it's taken the voice profile and stripped it out to its essence for different elements that we're considering. So X, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then it's got a voice consistency checklist. It's now also split out the platform formatting rules. And inside the Claude.md, we should be able to see that now when it comes to platform formatting rules, it's pointing, not dumping. So Claude can load it in when it needs it, when it's talking about actually formatting for a specific platform, and then offload it when it's not doing that. Now, we saw how to queue tasks. You can also run simultaneous tasks if there's a small task using the /BTW, which is ask a quick side question without interrupting the main conversation. But for anything that's like more comprehensive where things need changing, this isn't going to be good enough. You need to actually queue the task or start a separate terminal, and we'll come to that later. So we've just built a Claude.md file for this specific project, the content repurposing project. But when we think about it, most people don't just work on one project, and you're probably not planning on adopting Claude Code just for one project. So what happens when you expand this and the Claude.md concept to multiple projects and multiple clients and basically everything you want to do? And honestly, I've not seen many people explain how this actually works. And it took me a long time to figure out for myself exactly how to set this up properly. So I want you to understand now, while you're still learning, because it's going to change how you think about using Claude Code day to day and what information is inherited from which project files, etc. So here is the core insight. Once you get comfortable with Claude Code, you're not going to stay in one project folder. You're going to end up with lots of different project folders. So you've got your content engine, you've got your client work, you've got a personal brand folder, you might have a Obsidian memory folder, you've got admin stuff like emails, invoices, finance tracking, you've probably got experiments or apps you're building on the side. And suddenly it leaves you with the question, should I build a Claude.md for every single one of these and repeat myself? Do I paste my voice rules into every project? But actually, there's a much better way to do this. And once you understand it, you stop thinking of Claude Code as a tool that you use project by project, and you start thinking of it as your business operating system. And inside my school community, we've built out what's called the agentic operating system, which builds on this foundational concept. So the key concept you need to understand right now is parent inheritance. So files inherit from their parent folders. So when you run Claude Code in any folder, it doesn't just read that Claude.md in that exact folder. It's going to walk up the folder tree of any folder that you're in, all the way to the top folder, and it's going to combine every Claude.md file it finds on the way. And the file closest to the folder that you're working in is going to take priority. So if there's a Claude.md folder above this Claude Code course, it's going to inherit the rules from there, but any rules that contradict in this Claude.md, i.e. the folder we're working in, will take priority over conflicting rules from higher up. So let me show you what this looks like in practice. You might have a business operating system folder structure that looks a little bit like this. So on your desktop or in your projects folder, you'd have this projects subfolder. In that projects folder, you might have a master Claude.md file, and that would be in the structure that we've just described, and we'll go through an example of what that might have in a moment. Underneath, we might have our content engine project, which is exactly what we're building inside now, inside this Claude Code course folder. So this would be called content engine. And inside that folder, we have the Claude.md, which is project specific. So this content engine, when it runs, would adopt all rules that sit in that master Claude.md. You also need to know that that means it's going to take up the tokens and use more tokens if you've got a larger Claude.md file that's sat in a parent folder above it. Then we might have a separate client work folder where we have a Claude.md, which is our agency rules if we're servicing many clients. And underneath that, we might have individual clients, Acme Corp, Beta Limited, and inside those, we might have client-specific rules. So you can see how if we were working inside the Acme Corp client, we would use these Claude.md rules, but it would also adopt the agency rules, and it would also adopt the project rules. That's parent inheritance. So it adopts all the Claude.md files that sit in the folder chain above it. Then instead of your agency brand, you might have a personal brand folder with a Claude.md, which basically has different voice rules. So these would take priority over any voice rules that are defined in that master Claude.md. And then we've got the admin folder, etc., etc. So you can start to see how you can actually have these master files that feed down into your individual files underneath. So it leads to, for example, on the left-hand side, multiple folders. So right now we're in Claude Code course, and my Claude Code course sits in a projects Claude Code folder. And what I could actually do if I go back to Visual Studio Code and I go File, Open Folder, and I open this projects Claude Code parent folder, you can see now on the left-hand side that I've got all of the different folders inside there. So I'm now operating inside this projects Claude Code course. And if I wanted to, I could create a Claude.md file that actually runs true across all of these. So all of the subfolders are going to inherit the Claude.md rules of this, including the one that we're working inside, the Claude Code course. And you can see underneath there all of the things we've done so far. So we've got a Claude.md at this parent folder, we've got a Claude.md inside the Claude Code course. Now in practice, when you're actually working inside here, you can either be working at this parent folder level, or you can be working inside the individual folders. So say, for example, we wanted to work inside our Claude Code course, or probably more suitably named our content engine here, then we would have to actually tell it in the terminal to jump into that folder. So right now we're working inside the project's Claude Code folder, as you can see on screen. But to jump inside that specific folder, we just use a command called cd, which is going to put us in the next level down. So whatever we specify, if we say cd Claude Code course, then we're going to jump into that folder. And you can see I'm now sat within that folder. And if I start Claude within there, Claude is going to start within my project's Claude Code folder, Claude Code course, or our content engine. So now it's actually reading the Claude.md from the content engine, but it's also reading the Claude.md rules from the parent folder, which is the project's Claude Code. And that's what we demonstrate here in the notes. So if I cd into the project folder, does Claude still see the master files above it? Absolutely it does. It walks up that directory tree from wherever Claude is sitting, which in this case is our content engine or our Claude Code course. Now we can come in here and actually rename this, and we'll rename it to Content Engine to make it clearer. But you can see the same concept in my Agentic OS, where inside this, which is my own business OS, we have a Claude.md file, which is a comprehensive, 200, 300 line file. And then multiple clients can sit underneath those and inherit the context from that Claude.md. The same actually applies to when you want to share things like reference files that we created before. So inside our content engine, we had some references like brand voice, platform formatting. Now, brand voice is not going to be specific to the content engine. So what we could do is actually pull those references out to the main folder and reference them in the Claude.md file. So instead of saying all voice and tone guidelines live in /references/brand voice, we would point it to the parent folder across here. Now you can see this demonstrated in the Agentic OS folder structure, where we have a set of brand context like voice profile and a set of agent context like memory and information about the user that is read by this Claude.md file. And you can see that in the Claude.md, where we refer to brand context, which is this folder, /voice profile, whenever we're talking about applying our voice to any project here. Now, you might be wondering, what would you actually put in this Claude.md? So let's go back into the README, and let's talk about the master Claude.md. And this is just an example using that 5-question framework of some things that you might add into your Claude.md, but this is totally individual to you and the way you work. So you might say things like, every project lives in its own folder, reference lives in /references. I should review everything before it ships. Drafts always save to. And for example, in the Agentic OS, we've got drafts always saved to the projects. We've got project briefs inside here. We've got all of the outputs of specific skills, and we'll come to skills shortly. We've got voice and patterns, which apply everywhere. Some specific rules that we've deemed important. Don't start a post with excited to share or thrilled to announce. Open with a hook always. Plain UK English, no fluff. Use you and I and never we. Some gotchas like never fabricate stats. And we can actually support that with a few different skills like research skills or validation skills, and we'll come to those. And then what workflow we have. So plan before building greater than 30-minute tasks. So this just says, if I've not put it in plan mode, make sure that we actually go through and plan this. And next we'll talk about plan mode. Save plans to spec.md. Always 2 to 3 variations of outputs so I can pick. So you could take this and put it inside this Claude.md file, which at the moment is blank. And now, if I close up those folders, all of these folders would adopt the rules as stated in this Claude.md file. Now, my equivalent is the Agentic OS, where I've got a Claude.md file and files underneath, but this is like having a global folder that feeds into multiple of your business folders there. So once you understand that Claude reads files by walking up that tree, you're now ready to understand something else that confuses a lot of people when they start. The difference between what's called global and local installed, because it's basically the same question. What happens when you walk all the way up past your projects folder, so higher than this projects folder, to the very top of your computer where Claude is installed? So that's what we're going to cover now. And this is the concept of global versus local. So the same concept we just discussed for Claude.md files actually applies to everything Claude Code installs. So skills, /commands, hooks, permissions that we did, all of them. And I know we haven't covered skills and commands yet. We're going to come to that. But first, it's best to understand actually when you install something, where are you installing it? And how does Claude Code get access to that? So all the way up where Claude is installed, you have this squiggly line, the tilde and the slash is the home directory. Wherever you've installed Claude Code on your computer is its home directory. Inside that, there's a .claude/ folder, which is actually hidden. So all dot folders are usually hidden by default. Now, if there's a Claude.md file in that folder, that will load those rules everywhere. And you can actually add your own Claude.md to that level. It's not automatically built when you install Claude Code. And I don't recommend it when you're starting out, because it's best, in my opinion, to see all of the folders and all of the rules that your Claude Code is operating by. So if you did have one in this global home directory, it would load everywhere. All of the rules would load into all of the projects that you do inside Claude Code. You can also install skills or standard operating procedures at that global level. And a lot of these install at the global level by default, but we'll show you how to install it locally, i.e. in your folder structure, so you can actually see them and edit them more easily and not overwhelm Claude Code. Again, commands and settings you can have at that global level. But then inside our projects folder, which we're looking at now, projects Claude Code, we might have our business OS master or agentic OS Claude.md, as I've got it. We might then have our content engine, where we have specific files which are local and therefore visible in our file directory on the left-hand side. So inside our content engine, we have our .claude folder. We don't actually have that yet. We'll build that next. That will contain our skills and our commands that are only accessible to that project folder, i.e. they're local. We have our Claude.md file, which we just built, which is project specific and local to that content engine, which means we can look into the file and actually debug it, change it, and do everything there. So everything inside this project that's visible on the left-hand side is local to our project. And anytime we install skills, commands, anything from anywhere, we can actually tell it to install this locally or globally. And we've touched on this already, but what's the downside of installing globally? Well, firstly, you can't see it. It's in a hidden folder, not in the file tree on the left-hand side. So you could install a ton of new resources, but actually you might not remember what you've installed, and you're actually loading things into context. And we know that context is really precious for Claude Code in how it's performing. If you install something globally, it's going to go down to every single project, whether you want it to or not. So you can't install things that are client specific if it's just pushing into all of your clients. The visibility makes it harder, or lack of visibility makes it harder to debug. And you start becoming more of a black box model where you don't really understand anymore what Claude Code is made up of. You don't know why things are happening, why skills are activating. But if you can see it all on the left-hand side, the visibility, you can debug exactly why. So my general rule of thumb is always install locally first. And if you think, actually, I'm going to use this across all my projects, you can always change the install and put it one level higher and actually promote it to global after using it for a couple of weeks. Now we'll come to how to install things local versus global when we actually install. But basically, whenever we're npx, i.e. using our installation command, we're going to say npx what we're installing, and we can add -- local, which is called a flag -- we're just going to flag local, and we're going to make sure therefore that it installs in our content folder on the left hand side, and we can actually see it in our folder structure. You can actually figure out by following these commands also where this folder structure is, where this global folder structure is, by using these commands for Mac and Windows. So let's talk about planning now. So we already talked about how to just initiate a task, but planning is so incredibly important for retaining context so that Claude Code doesn't drift off course if we're doing a larger project. If we're not just doing a small thing, then we always want to use a type of planning framework. And the most simple type of that is actually just using the inbuilt planning framework. So we're going to go back to and make sure we're in the correct project folder. So we want to be in the content engine folder. So you can actually use CD- to check and go back to the higher level project folder. So we're going to now go CD content engine to make sure that we're in the correct folder. We can clear the terminal by typing in clear. And now what we're going to actually do is demonstrate if we start Claude, we've got our settings.json. So it's going to start with our permissions that we have in there. Yes, I trust this folder. And what we're effectively doing inside here is going to show you the way in which we could actually plan out a deeper project inside this content engine. So I'm going to hit Shift and Tab, and you can see down here we've got accept edits on, we've got plan mode on, which is the one we're going to use, and then we can switch to just normal execution mode. So accept edits would effectively be like bypassing permissions. Plan mode is exactly what it sounds like. It's not going to be able to actually execute anything. It's just going to create a plan for us. So in plan mode, Claude is effectively going to read files, think about the code base, ask us questions, but it cannot write anything to our folder structure. So we do this to actually plan out a project plan first, and then we can say, yes, we want to switch to execution mode, and you can continue with the plan. So we've got a plan mode prompt here for our content engine. So say we wanted to build out this content repurposing engine for this project to do more than what we're actually going to demonstrate in this course. So I want to build out the content repurposing engine to pull source transcripts from a folder, generate 3 variations for LinkedIn, X, and a newsletter, save drafts organized by date and platform, produce a summary report at the end of it. We're going to basically ask it to then interview me about the requirements, ask about edge cases, file naming, failure modes, and what I want in the summary report. Don't build anything yet. Write the final plan to spec.md, a file that we can refer back to when we're doing the build. So when Claude Code's context window gets too full, it's able to refer back to this spec.md and see what we've done and what's left to be done. So I'm going to copy paste this. I'm going to paste it in here, but instead, actually, I'm going to remove the lines about interviewing me about the requirements because we just want to see what it outputs as a plan. And we also don't need to say, don't build anything yet, because plan mode by default is actually going to do that. So I'm going to copy paste this now. You can hit Control and U to clear that line that I just pasted in. Just a quick tip there. We've got plan mode on. We're going to paste that in, and we're now going to see the power of plan mode where it's not going to execute anything, but it's going to come back with a plan for us. Now, whilst that's running, why does plan mode actually matter? We've kind of talked about this a little bit already. Context rot. So Claude's memory is going to fill up over time. You can see that by this green bar. We're at 12% of the context so far, but quality will drop as sessions get longer. So as we feed in more tokens, the ability for Claude to actually recall those tokens becomes worse. So if we're getting to 100% here, the recall of our plan is going to be pretty terrible, if I'm honest with you. And therefore, it's going to auto compact and get rid of a lot of the context. So if we put a plan in a file like the spec.md file, then the file is going to survive even when we get to 100% and we start compacting that memory to save space. So the general rule of thumb is like, if it's going to take more than 10 minutes to build it, then you should stick plan mode on and at least get a first level plan from Claude Code. This will massively improve your output quality, by the way. And Boris Cherny always writes with plan mode. It's asking us a few questions. What form should the engine take? It should be a structured prompt/skill that Claude Code follows when you run it. Where should source transcripts live? Let's have a dedicated sources folder. We're going to submit those answers and it's going to come back with a comprehensive plan that it's going to write to a spec.md file. Now, we're not going to execute on this plan. I'm just showing you for the concept of how you would actually plan out a task, save it to a spec.md folder, and then it will also auto ask us, do you want to execute on this plan or do you want to provide us with some notes? We're going to approve some permissions. You can see it's using this plan sub-agent. So Claude Code actually has 3 inbuilt sub-agents: plan, explore, and general purpose. So when it's running this sub-agent, it's basically offloading some context to a specific sub-agent that can only read and cannot execute. And therefore that sub-agent on its own is actually creating that plan and going to come back to us with the plan. This sub-agent has its own set of contexts and it's executing using that context only. We'll come to agents and sub-agents later on in the course. So here is Claude's plan, content repurposing engine, spec.md. So it's got some context. It's got the folder structure, and you can see that if we just asked it to execute, it might not have thought about the folder structure for this. So we've got like drafts, we've got dates of the draft, we've got transcripts that sit in there per platform, we've got the summary report, multiple source files each get their own subfolder. We've got variations, so different angles that it's going to do for each variations. We asked it to do 3 variations of each post. We've got the draft file format, so every variation is going to include specific front matter, or everything that comes up front, including the word count, the angle, the variation, the platform, the source. It's going to contain a summary report structure. You can see how this builds out in way more detail than if we were just to execute it. So it's really, really gone away and thought about this. And then basically at the end of the planning mode, it's going to ask us, do we want to actually just go ahead and do this? And we can say, yes, clear the context. Yes, auto accept edits and basically bypass all our permissions. Yes, but we still want to approve commands. And then we can also leave notes of what we want it to change, i.e. no, but change these things. So like I said, we're not going to execute on this plan because we're going to move on to the next foundational concepts. But before any project that's going to take a significant amount of time or more than 10 minutes, I would highly recommend going through the plan mode first. It's worth its weight for the rework that you won't have to do. So we're going to hit escape there to just go back effectively on that. And we're going to hit Control C, and that actually closes our terminal session. and I just wanted to demonstrate how to close a terminal session, i.e. kill the terminal, but you can also resume that exact session by copying and pasting the Claude, and then we've got the flag resume, and then the ID, it's the session ID. So we can go back in here and it will basically work out what happened in that session, and therefore it still has the context of the session conversation in there. So now we can continue talking in that conversation. Now you could argue that everything we've done so far shouldn't warrant its own project folder, because actually all we're effectively doing is building a small set of resources that can repurpose content. It doesn't necessarily need to be its own full project. This isn't its own app. It isn't its own client. This could actually be part of our larger project folder where we've placed our Claude.md. So inside our projects Claude Code folder, we're actually now going to start building out the rest of the foundations like slash commands and skills, and show you how to use those. And we will therefore not be inside the content engine folder anymore. We will be outside of that. And we will show you how to kind of extract everything we've talked about so far into smaller, more modular foundations like slash commands, which we'll come on to in a moment, that you can then repurpose and use across multiple project folders. So the first thing we're going to need to do is inside our project's Claude Code folder and create a .claude folder. And what that's effectively going to do is house all of our commands, skills that are going to be accessible across all of these different folders. So we're inside our business operating system, and inside .claude, we're going to have our commands. Now, slash commands are relatable to those tasks that you do every single week. So where you have the same brief, the same instructions, the same format, you just have potentially different inputs, like writing a proposal, repurposing your content, generating a status update, drafting follow-up emails. So every time you do it, you're typing the same instructions to Claude or ChatGPT. You've probably seen yourself doing this and adding context every single time. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you could just invoke a slash command to do the same task and write the same prompt every single time? Well, that's exactly what slash commands are designed to do. And these are the precursor to skills, which are more powerful, that we'll come on to next. But first, it's important to know that you can use repeatable slash commands inside your project. So we might have, for example, in our project structure, project Claude Code, our .claude folder, and then inside that we would have a commands folder. And if I also create a skills folder, you'll be able to see when I drop down .claude, we've got a commands and skills will come to us afterwards. Inside that commands folder, we're able to create specific commands that relate to specific tasks, and they will be markdown files with their own prompts. So for example, everything we've done so far in the content engine about repurposing content could literally just be a slash command. So we could invoke that manually and say, here's a block of text, or see the transcript here. Now repurpose that content. And that could be a slash command where we just pass in that transcript, for example. So inside the commands, we would create a new file and we would call that repurpose.md. And we don't even need to create these files, by the way. We can just ask Claude Code to create it for us, but it's part of best practice to actually create these for yourself so you understand exactly what it's creating in the background. And we can even have multiple slash commands under certain categories. So we could have content slash repurpose. So we could have a folder inside the commands that says content and repurpose. But right now, because we're creating just a few, we're going to leave them underneath the commands folder. Now, the file name is going to be our command name, so repurpose. And if you wanted to invoke one under a subfile, you'd use content slash. So for example, inside the commands, let's create a content folder and a newsletter.md command. And we're not actually going to put any content in here. But you can see now inside the commands, we've got content, and inside that we've got newsletter, and inside commands, we've also got repurpose. So all of these are going to form their own slash commands. Now, before you run any slash commands, you need to make sure that actually we quit Claude Code and restart it. Otherwise, it's not going to register. So if I start Claude again, it should now register that there are commands in the folder that I'm working in. So right now, if you remember, we're still in the content engine folder. So actually I need to quit Claude Code again, and I need to CD back one folder, and I'm now in the project / Claude Code folder. So we're now in this higher level folder. I'm going to clear that and start Claude again. And now it should recognize that there's a .claude folder and there's a commands folder underneath that. So whenever I hit slash, I should now be able to see, if I type in repurpose, we've now got a custom command called repurpose, and I can enter any prompt after that point. So what this is going to do is basically call the prompt inside this repurpose folder, or I could actually now type in content And you can see that I've got a content newsletter command, and I can hit tab to auto follow that, and then I can type in any prompt after that point. So what do we actually put in the command? Well, it's effectively like prompting ChatGPT, right? So for the repurposing source content, we might say repurpose the source content at $arguments, and $arguments are dynamic inputs. So wherever we type in /repurpose, anything that comes after that is basically the $arguments. So we've got this prompt in here. So it's a little bit of a standard operating procedure. It says, this is the process you're going to follow. You're going to read the source file at the path provided. The path provided is going to be passed in dynamically by our arguments. So we could say that actually the source file, if we drag it out now into our main folder, the source file is transcript.txt. And that's what we had before, right? Transcript.txt. We need to make sure it's not inside the content engine. That's why I dragged it out to our main folder, because that's where we're working. Look, projects, Claude Code. Read the source file. Identify the 3 to 5 main ideas worth pulling out. For each idea, generate platform-specific drafts, LinkedIn, X, newsletter. So it's basically like the Claude.md file that we had before, but there's no need to make it into a separate project. We could just invoke this as a command that we use every week we want to repurpose some content. Then it's got some rules. Then it tells you where to save the drafts to /drafts/date/platform. Follow the brand voice in Claude.md, and Claude.md will link to the brand voice. We should make sure we also pull out the brand voice again. So let's pull out our references file into the main folder, out of our project folder. And you can see we're slowly pulling away from having Content Engine as its own project to actually just becoming this business operating system where we have multiple projects operating inside of it. And we can, for example, repurpose content like transcript.txt. So all I would do is actually to invoke this, say repurpose, and then I'm passing in dynamically the arguments, which is transcript.txt. If I run that, and I might need to restart now that I've pulled all these folders out, we'll see if it finds it. And you can see it's now successfully loaded that command, even though it says skill. We'll talk about skills in a moment, but it's effectively loading in that repurpose.md command. And I can tell it's that one because I've got no other skills anywhere called /repurpose. It's just this repurpose.md file. But what I've realized is I didn't actually copy anything into repurpose.md. So I'm just going to stop that by hitting Control-C. I'm going to make sure I copy these /command rules that we had in there. I'm going to copy those to my repurpose.md, save it, and we're going to rerun that again. And you can actually run through previous commands by just hitting the up and down arrows on your keyboard. You can see I've got /repurpose transcript.txt. So you can think of /commands as repeatable things that you're going to manually invoke. And the key here is you'll manually invoke them. I need to actually use the /repurpose and then write my arguments or the location of the source file. If I want to invoke these, they're not automatically invoked by just asking a question with Claude. Automatically invoking them brings us onto the next concept, which is skills. But let's first see where we get. It says, I've read the transcript. Here are the 5 main ideas I'm pulling out. So immediately it's read the repurpose.md and started actioning this. Read the source file, identify the 3 to 5 main ideas, and then for each idea, generate platform-specific drafts for LinkedIn, X, and newsletter. Then save them to /drafts, which you can see it's now got down here. If I close up the content engine, we've got /drafts, today's date, 9th of April, and it's effectively going to save a draft inside that per platform. So we're going to have probably inside drafts, LinkedIn.md, which we can see now, idea 1, idea 2, and idea 3. And then we should get also for X and a newsletter. So from one simple command, /repurpose, passing in a single source, we're getting 3 output drafts saved into here. So it's following the rule set that we've defined in there. Now, some of the limitations of commands are that we can't include a huge amount of context. You'll have noticed in the repurpose.md, this is very succinct and short prompt. So if you want to do something more complicated, or things like include your brand voice or more rules or more outputs, then what we're going to need to do is actually build on that with reference files. And for that, we can use skills. And you can see if we preview the threads, it's got the source, it's got idea 1, variation A, B for each idea. And we've got, thread pages 1 to 5 for each of those variations and for each of the ideas. So it's a very quick way to invoke a specific task, but you can't have a huge amount of reference information and you can't automatically invoke it. We need to actually ask Claude every time to repurpose something by using / And that's why they're called slash commands. Okay, so let's move on to skills. And after the Claude.md, skills are the next most important thing that you need to understand when you're working with Claude Code. And I'm not exaggerating when I say skills are going to be the most powerful concept in this entire course. If you're going to take away two things, take away the Claude.md and what skills are and how to build good skills. So slash commands are really good, but as we've seen, you invoke them by typing in slash. You have to type that command, and they're best for tasks that you need to do on a regular basis, but you know that you want to force Claude to go through that process. Skills are entirely different from that, but have some shared concepts. So the difference is Claude can invoke the skills itself. So from a skill description and a skill name, Claude is able to determine from a prompts that you write in what skills to use. And you can just think of skills as a folder that contains a best practice or instruction manual on how to do a specific task. So we're going to build one out for content repurposing, and it will effectively replace or build on that command that we've already done for content repurposing. So I could, of course, just use the command, but if I want Claude to actually understand when I just type in a natural language, oh, by the way, repurpose this, it's then going to find that repurposing skill by its description and invoke that. And we will have best practice guides on, which is the skill itself, on how to actually execute that process to our best practice standard. So effectively the same thing as slash commands, but the two key differences are they are invoked automatically by Claude, so we don't have to tell it to actually use it at the right time. It knows from the description. And the second difference is inside commands, we just had one file, repurpose.md. Inside the skills, what we're going to have is a skill.md, which is going to be effectively equivalent to our repurpose.md, our complete instruction manual that every time that skill is loaded in, that skill.md is loaded in. So let's build that first. And it's always capital skill.md. Whoops, sorry. So inside here, I should have said, actually, we need a folder. So we'll call it content repurpose. So now we have a skill inside there. I'm also just going to create another skill. So we have our skills inside our .claude folder. We have a content repurposing skill, and then we might have another skill in there. Inside that content repurposing folder, we will have a skill.md, and it will be capital skill. And we might also have inside that content repurposing folder, a references folder. So we might have our brand voice that goes in here, or we might have specific platform rules that we spoke about earlier. And we put in when we treated this like a project, we put this inside our Claude.md. If you remember, we had platform formatting rules, and we kept those inside references, platform formatting.md, which we now have brought out to the parent folder. So platform formatting probably doesn't need to be in a parent folder. It probably actually only applies to things related to content. So I'm going to drag that platform formatting.md into the references folder inside that skill and take it out of our parent reference folder. Because it's only applicable to things like content repurposing and content production, we might also have other folders like executable scripts or assets of examples and best practice. But the key difference between this and a command is in a command, we can only have one file. In a skill, we can have an entire folder with reference documents, with best practice examples. And then the skill.md itself is just the instruction manual with a description and a name. And the description tells Claude when to invoke that skill. Now, if you're wondering where I learn all about skills and skill building, which we'll come to, then Anthropic has the complete guide to building skills for Claude. And we'll reference some of that material there because it is absolutely critical you understand how to build out skills, because they are going to be the most useful thing. They're probably the reason that you've come to Claude Code in the first place. Like, this is like how to turn your agent from something that produces AI slop to something that's like expert level outputs. And this could be for your content repurposing, for building out a brand voice guide for you, for running through your invoice folder, for doing your accounting, for doing your marketing posts, creating your ads. There's absolutely everything that you do inside Claude Code can be improved by actually documenting a standard operating procedure, which is our skill.md file, and then getting Claude to invoke that at the right time. And the reason we do that is going back to our context rot problem. So we could just put all of this information into Claude's memory, but what a waste of tokens. And that's an expensive way to do it. And also Claude will forget a lot of the context, as we saw, because we get context rot if we overload Claude. So skill.md is a way of loading in that specific bit of context, that process document, those reference examples just at the right time, so that Claude just uses that snippet of information and produces a high quality output based on that, and then offloads it afterwards. So Claude does that automatically for us. It's going to load in the skill at the right time based on the description, based on the task we ask it to do, and then it's going to offload afterwards. So this is a fix for context problems and loading in the right context at the right time. And at its essence, what we've already seen is Claude's skills are just a folder of effectively a process document, which is our skill.md, any scripts or reference files, as well as any assets too. But you don't need to have any of these script reference or assets. They just supplement the main skill.md file. We're trying to not overload the context of Claude. So as a rule of thumb, we keep our main skill.md file under 200 lines. We sometimes slip a little bit over, but the same as the Claude.md, anytime that we have information that we want to include that does not go in the skill.md instruction manual, instruction steps, those are put inside the references like examples or API guides, or in our case, platform formatting rules. Those don't need to be in the skill.md. They just need to be loaded in at a specific step. So say, for example, in our content repurposing skill.md, one of the steps will be produce it for LinkedIn. And at that point, it will load in the platform formatting rules for LinkedIn and then offload the context once it moves to the next step where it doesn't require anymore the platform formatting rules. So it's all about loading context in at the right time and then offloading it, one, to save our money because tokens cost a lot, and two, to improve output quality because we don't want to experience context rot where we overload Claude with context. Now, some critical rules: skill.md must be called skill.md with case sensitive name. You must use kebab case, so all lowercase with dashes between it, and all documentation should go into the skill.md file or the references folder, like nowhere else. Don't include a readme, don't include anything else. It's not going to get used in the skill.md. We might have one that looks like this: skills/content repurpose or content repurposer, the skill.md, which are instructions, and we'll come back to this again and again, and then a references file, which might have our voice guide, which at the moment we've actually pointed to this brand voice folder here. We've got platform rules, which you saw we filled in, platform formatting, and then we might have our best posts as examples inside that reference file too. So we might have a folder of best posts or best examples. And then the folder name is effectively the skill name. So the skill is content repurpose. Now, the most important concept you need to understand, and this relates back to our context in at the right time, is that skill.mds have this front matter, or what's called front matter, which is shown in Markdown as these three dashes and these three dashes at the bottom. I don't know the official name. You don't really need to know the official name, but basically we've got a name and a description, and then underneath we have the instruction steps. So inside the skill.md file, we would have this front matter. So let's go into our skill.md file and start building it out. Content repurpose, it should be, and you can see it recognized that it was not the same name as the skill there. Use whenever the user asks to repurpose, adapt, or rewrite content for LinkedIn, X, Twitter, Instagram, a newsletter, or any social platform. So the art of building out a good description that's invoked well by Claude is saying exactly what it does. So I don't think this is particularly good at the moment because it doesn't say what it does. It just says use whenever. It should also say the trigger. So this is better because it says use whenever the user asks to repurpose, adapt, or rewrite content. And you should also put, the third rule is putting when it should not trigger to. So if I was to expand this, I would actually just go to Claude to start with, improve this YAML front matter for this skill. And I want you to do three things. I want you to say the triggers. And in particular, we want to mention trigger words, like when it would be invoked. I want you to say exactly what it does, which in this case is repurposing source content into LinkedIn, X, and Twitter posts. Sorry, LinkedIn, X, and newsletter posts. And I also want you to say what should not trigger it. So for example, when somebody asks for copywriting, this is about content repurposing from a source transcript and not copywriting. So yeah, it's easy to get actually Claude to help you build these skills. And we'll reference later a really useful skill, like a meta skill to do so, which is Claude Code or Anthropic's own skill creator skill. But right now it's important to actually build out your first one for yourself so that you understand exactly how it's made up. So once we have a better name and description here, and it's asking us to actually make the edits. Now this is a little bit wordy for me. I think this description's a little bit too long, but at least it's got the point, right? Trigger when the user says repurpose or turn this into or adapt this for. So it's important it's got those statements. What it does, it takes source content, typically a transcript, and repurpose it into platform specific drafts. Do not trigger when the user asks for original copywriting, add copy. So although it is quite long, it is quite specific. So I do actually like this, and we will keep this. And it would look less long if we had it not on multi-lines too. And then what happens underneath in the skill.md is we actually write the full instruction set for the skill. So this is just the step-by-step of this is what you will receive. This is the output I'm expecting. This is where to put the output. These are the references that you have, like platform formatting. And what we're going to do again is ask Claude to help us build out this skill. As an example, look inside the content engine folder. Inside the Claude.md, we basically described what this content-repurposing skill should do. So underneath the front matter, I want you to put the skill instruction set, just step-by-step instructions, keep it under 200 lines, and anything like platform formatting rules, you should separate into separate reference documents. And you can see we've already got a platform-formatting.md separate reference file. So help me create this skill, and let's update the skill.md and the references inside the content-repurpose skill. And out of the box, if you just give it the right instructions, the instructions that we're going through now, it will do a pretty good job, but we can actually extend that by using Anthropic's skill creator skill as well. So let's see what it comes up with inside the skill.md. And if I zoom out a little bit, we'll see that it will add to the instruction set underneath. And just think of the skill.md as literally the standard operating procedure. That's all it is. We'll come back here and we can see exactly what it's done. It has created a full instruction set inside the skill.md with a 6-step process and a rules section. It references to both supporting docs, and it's basically expanded the original platform formatting supporting doc and created a new content angles formatting doc. So you can see in the content angles, it separated out things like hook types, narrative structures, CTA patterns. So you can see this is like best practice. And right now we're not worried about checking the quality of the content angles and things like that. We can bring in external research. We're just worried about how to actually create a skill that does this kind of thing. And let's review now the skill.md. So we've got the content repurposing skill, and you'll notice that when you're previewing it as Markdown, you can't actually see the YAML front matter or the name and description in here. This is just something that's in the code in the backend, and you can't actually see it. It goes straight onto the overview and then the inputs. So we've got 2 inputs, source file and platform scope. So whether they want it to be LinkedIn, X, or newsletter. And then the step-by-step process. This is the core bulk of the skill.md. Read and absorb the source. Do not summarize it back to the user. Extract the main ideas. Draft per platform. 2 thread variations per idea. Apply voice and quality checks. And you can see at this point, it goes through a checklist. And it also says, check the platform formatting rules have been followed. And it points to the references/platform formatting. So the important thing here, which we'll come to next, is the context is loaded in only at the right time. We don't overload it, and we don't make this skill.md have all of the information from the content angles and the platform formatting. We separate it into reference files. That's how you build a good skill that performs well. And you can see the skill.md comes to under 130 lines. And then it's saying what the output looks like. So it's saved to the drafts folder down here under the date and platform. And then it presents the summary back to the user. And then we've got a set of rules too. So without having to really use the skill creator by Claude, we know the general rules now. And what we've done is effectively ask it to create it in our format. And now we've got a skill that's more powerful and more built out than our command to repurpose content. Now, here comes the trick in how you use them, and then I'll tell you how it loads in context one at a time. So you can actually still invoke this skill using a / command. So if I type in content-repurpose, you can see that my description now appears here, trigger when the user says repurpose. So I can actually invoke it automatically. But the power in skills is you don't need to invoke it automatically. I can just tell it repurpose transcript.txt. And what we're going to see is that Claude reads through our skills and it says, oh, great, we've got a content repurpose skill which matches the description here. I'm going to read that file and I'm now going to use that skill and go through the skill.md to actually create all the outputs that skill.md tells us to do. Now, the importance of getting the good description right is so critical, because if you think about it, you'll have lots of skills that are similar. You'll probably have multiple for content, not just repurposing. It'd be like content writing, things like that. So the trigger when, what it does, and do not trigger when are so critical to actually loading the right skill at the right time. Now I'll draft all platforms, 4 strong standalone ideas from this transcript, and it's going to basically load the skill or has loaded the skill and it's going through each of the steps. But the important thing is it's loading in the right reference context at the right time, which brings us to the concept of progressive disclosure. So this is so critical in the way that we build skills, and it's very easy to understand, but sounds complicated. So progressive disclosure is just disclosing the right context at the right time, like we continue to reference. So layer one is the description. So you have around 100 words, like we saw, the YAML front matter in the skill, the name and the description. So this is always loaded into your Claude Code instance. So whenever you've got skills installed inside your local project folder or your global project folder, remember they're passed down, all of those descriptions are loaded in. So if you've installed a package of 200 skills and they have similar crossover, one, all of their descriptions are loading in, so it's taking up more tokens. And two, Claude Code might have trouble picking between certain skills. So it is critical to get those descriptions absolutely nailed so that it activates the right skill at the right time. Once it understands that it should be loading that skill, it then loads in the skill.md body. So like we said, this should be around no more than 200 lines, and it is loaded only into Claude context when the skill triggers. And this is all the process steps. Now, you can have unlimited reference files like we had. So this is a fairly simple skill. We've got content angles, we've got platform formatting. We could have examples per platform in our brand voice. And what we do is just reference them like we saw in the skill.md and only bring them in when needed. Claude knows to only bring that in step 5 when it needs that reference file. So down here, when it's going through the platform formatting rules and applying voice and quality checks, it will say, okay, I need to go and actually load in that platform formatting.md. And then I can unload it when I move on to step 5 afterwards. So the importance here is like platform formatting. If I look at the whole thing, there's 94 lines alone, 94 lines of context that I've just saved myself and Claude from loading in every single time because I'm only loading it in and offloading it at this step only. So the point is, with skills, Claude's going to pull in exactly what it needs, no additional context, and it's going to pull it in at the right time. And we can see that our skills have now successfully executed. And down here, we should have the drafts saved into LinkedIn, newsletter, and X. So now you know how to use skills and how to actually build skills for yourself. Where do you actually find skills? And this is just going to be a quick primer on the fact you don't need to build them yourself, but I'd highly recommend never just taking them out of the box because they're always so bespoke to your brand voice, your business, your context, that I would 100% always customize every skill that I bring in. And also most of them are actually built quite poorly because they're just built by people using Claude Code to build skills and not abiding by the set rules that we've said today. So the biggest problem you'll see in off-the-shelf skills is that they don't have reference files. They just have a huge 500, 1,000 line skill.md, which means you're loading in all that context every time you activate the skill. A lot of them also have poorly written descriptions, so you might as well not have them in the first place because Claude Code might not be able to even find them. But here are some recommended places to look for Claude Code skills, but I'd recommend also changing them and adapting them for your own use case. So one that is not on here is skillsmp.com, and this is effectively an agent skills marketplace. You can see there's 800,000 skills. So you think these are manually built or they're built by Claude Code. So you really need to cherry pick exactly what you want. And I highly recommend not installing too many of these. And you can actually go and search down here, or you can go and filter by category or by occupation, anything like that. So you wanted an SEO skill, you just type in SEO and you'd get a list of custom built by other people SEO skills. Now, a lot of you will wonder, are these actually safe to download? And that is why you need the ability to actually understand what's inside the skill. So we can go into this, for example, audit, plan and implement SEO improvement skill. So it makes me wonder really how well this is built out, because actually this firstly looks like a very succinct skill with no reference files. So it's kind of missing a lot of the context it needs. It doesn't really have a set of process steps. It just has a bunch of examples that I'd stick in reference files. And I'm not saying that this isn't a good skill and contains some good stuff, but it's certainly not built out in the way that I would want to build out my skills. You can find other examples where you have multiple folders. And the key thing around safety is looking out where they have a scripts folder, because Scripts are executable things on your machine, so it can go and actually run a script on your machine. Whereas if it's a .md file or .markdown file, you can actually read through quite easily the instructions and see exactly what this skill does. Now, if I did want to add this, you can see that this is a global install. I can actually just copy this from here, npx skills add, and then it has the name of the skill or the reference to that skill, or I can download it as a skill folder and actually upload it manually into my VS Code. But if I did want to install this, I go to a fresh terminal, and you can see we've got npx skills add, the repo name, and then -- skill. But like we said, we want to install this locally because we want the visibility of being able to see this file. So all we need to do is add -- local to the end of any install. And what we'll see is this skill will now install inside our skills folder, and you'll see something like SEO skill or everything Claude Code skill. And I just want to make sure I'm not installing a complete package of multiple skills here with the everything Claude Code, because the everything Claude Code repo has a lot of skills, and I don't want to be, bringing in skills that I haven't read and understood. You can see that everything Claude Code has a lot of different skills in here. So I'm actually just going to open up Claude and remind myself how to download just the SEO skill from this repo. And it's okay to sometimes have these questions. I can't remember exactly how to get it. I just know that I only want the SEO skill from this repo. How to download just the SEO skill from this repo. And it's saying you just use -- skill, so flag skill, and then skill name afterwards. I believe it's called SEO. So let's give it a try. Let's say no, because we don't want to use that. And this time it's given us the GitHub repo as well. But the point is you can install other people's skills. It's just you've got to work out how to get those skills specifically. And I'm more confident this time that it's only going to be that skill. And you need to make sure you add the -- local flag at the end. Otherwise, it's going to install and clone all those skills into your global folder, which is not what we want. And some have this nice installation window. So we can actually select here, do we want it in the current directory or available globally across all projects? So we're going to say across this project. We're just going to use whatever installation method it says. And you can see now we've got the SEO skill with the skill.md that's appeared inside here. So we've basically downloaded and can use and can adapt somebody else's SEO skill. But I'm actually going to go through and delete that skill because I don't want that SEO skill in here. So shortly we're going to move on from skills, but I just want to reflect on that skills are the most important concept after the Claude.md that you will learn when you're using Claude Code. And if you think about how you could use multiple skills, you can actually start chaining these into workflows. So I might have a research skill that goes out and does my content research. I then have a scripting skill that writes scripts for my YouTube videos in a certain way in my brand voice that's from my global or my file level references folder where we have the brand voice there. I then have a content repurposing skill that takes my YouTube transcripts and turns that into other content that I can publish. So you can see how you can start chaining skills together to actually make workflows rather than just skills. And that's something that we're heavily focused on inside our Agentic Academy, school.com/scrapes. And I'll leave you with one thing on skills, which is you can absolutely build your own skills. And here's a 6-step framework for building your own skills. So make sure you name it. Make sure you have the triggers that we talked about, the 3 different things, what it is, what words to use to trigger it, and what words should not trigger it. Make sure you define what the outcome state is, like putting it in a drafts folder, any dependencies, like loading in any reference files at a certain time. And then, of course, we need our step-by-step instructions, and it will go through each of these steps at a time. And then, obviously, we need to put any information around edge cases. As we start to use the skill, we notice more things and we put in rules or edge cases. Examples always beat instructions. So real example posts, Claude can do better with than actually just writing rules. And you should know that skills are portable. So Claude.ai, Claude Cowork, the API, and in fact, even other things like Gemini, anti-gravity, all of those have started adopting this skills framework. So the concepts are largely the same, even if the naming is slightly different. It might not be called skill.md in other platforms. The process document, skill, best practice, examples, reference files, that concept still exists because context rot and loading in the right context at the right time is a problem in all of these different platforms. And like I've recommended throughout this, you can use Anthropic's skill creator skill that helps you build your own new skills properly. So every time you're building a skill, it will invoke the skill creator skill. And I will leave the link to that in the README that will be available in the description below. But what you can do is go to the GitHub, we can copy the URL and we can use this line again. So we're going to go npx skills add, we're going to copy the repo URL, and this will link directly to the actual skill. So we don't need to put -- skill. And then again, we put -- local, which is our flag. And hopefully now that will understand that we're trying to add the skill creator skill to our skills folder in this project folder here. You can see it's loading, it's loading the repository. So actually there's quite a clean interface a lot of the time for these skills being installed. We want it for Claude Code only, and we want it in our project directly. We want to follow their installation method. And you can see that we've now got the skill creator skill. If I go into the skill.md, this will be invoked when you want to create new skills, modify and improve existing skills, and measure skill performance. Use when users want to create a skill from scratch, edit or optimize an existing skill, run evals, etc., etc. Now, together with skills and commands, so skills are like Claude's way of invoking certain process documents. Commands are obviously what we trigger. You have hooks. So not everything requires AI and the usage of tokens. Hooks are basically everything that sits outside skills and commands. So it's things you want to happen automatically every single time you run a task. For example, for our content repurposing, it might be banned word checker. So it scans every output document in the drafts and says, are there any of those words in there? If there are, flag it to me or remove them. Hooks actually live in .claude/settings.json. So the settings.json that we had before, we would actually move now from our content engine, because we're now creating it on a higher level. We move it to our .claude folder, and you can see in our settings.json, we would add it to this permissions, allow and deny. And it would be things like notify me when a task finishes. So you might have noticed I get notifications up on the right-hand top of the screen. This is something we do in the school community, where actually when you're away from your projects and Claude Code is working in the background, you don't want to sit and monitor when you need to approve something. So you get a little notification up in the top right-hand screen, and you can come straight back to Claude Code to get it on with its next task. It might be staging things to GitHub for your version control. It might be protecting your secrets or scanning for banned words. So I'm not going to dwell on these too much, because actually I haven't found myself using a load of them other than the notification and the banned words checker. So you can see an example in my Agentic OS inside the Claude folder, the settings.json. We have all of the permissions there, and then we have various different hooks. So they look quite complex, but you can just get Claude to actually write them and add them to your settings.json. So this one, for example, is our script that notifies us of any task that's finished. So what this basically says is, after every prompt is submitted, run this script, which is a script we've got in our hooks info folder called ccnotify.py, something that I've installed separately. You can look this up online, how to install it. And it will basically run that script every time. And that script will say, has a task finished? Is a permission needed? If so, then I'm going to fire a notification. So up until this point, we've been operating purely within Claude Code and not with any of our apps. So MCP servers, or Model Context Protocol servers, are designed to help us interact with our data where we would actually use it in our business. So you can connect it to Notion, you can connect it to Airtable, ClickUp, your CRMs like HubSpot, your Google Drive documents. We're basically trying to take the power and flexibility of Claude Code to deliver actions in our actual apps, to be able to read data from our apps, to be able to write data to our apps. And you can think of MCP as a standard protocol, a standard way of interacting with various different APIs. So services have all their different APIs, and that just means that we can connect to them in a certain way. But everyone has their own standard of API. Everyone has their own way of calling the API, way of passing certain messages. And Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is just designed to unify that way, so that actually an MCP, once connected, can actually just understand how to call that API underneath the MCP, and therefore how to work with the data in that app. So it's often been compared to the USB-C of the AI agent world, because what we're effectively doing is connecting all these different MCP servers from Slack, Google Mail, Calendar, etc., in a unified way, like the USB-C connector, to our MCP host, which in this case is Claude Code. So think USB-C for software, one plug fits everything. And there's some suggestions here of MCPs you might want to work with. Supabase for database queries. Context 7 is basically up-to-date docs for all LLMs and AI code editors. So everything you want to use, like N8N, ShadCN, PostHog for your website analytics, Google Analytics, all of these docs are stored in Context 7. And by installing the Context 7 MCP, we're able to effectively go and get the latest docs when we're interacting with different softwares. Or you might connect it to YouTube, and we're going to do that in a second, because what we want to do is effectively pull our videos to get the transcripts and then also connect it to Notion too. You can, similar to skills, actually find these servers created by other people at mcp.so or awesome MCP servers. So if we go to mcp.so, you can see there's loads of servers on here that people have created that basically connect to different apps. So for example, if we search YouTube, we've got a YouTube transcript.dev. We've got one that uploads videos to YouTube, or we can go to awesome MCP servers, which is mcpservers.org. And similarly, we've got a search across here. And if we type in, for example, Notion this time, we can see that we've got Notion's official MCP server. So it's important to note that other people will have created these MCP servers, but also Notion can release their own official MCP server, for example. So let's say we store our YouTube videos, the URL, and maybe the transcript inside Notion, but we can connect up to the Notion official MCP server and pull that data and then push it through using our skill. So what we're going to do is connect up to this MCP server. And the easiest way to do this, you can manually do it yourself, but why not just ask Claude Code to do it? So connect to the Notion MCP server, walk me through it step by step, and I can pass in the server URL if I want to, but it's basically going to create a .mcp.json file, set up all the config, lead me through setting up the credentials that we need. The important thing to know about MCP servers is they have an inbuilt ability to list what functionality they have available. So you can see that a Notion MCP server is already connected and available in your current session. That's because I set it up at a global level. If you haven't set it up, then it's going to walk you through the actual setup. And you can see that it's got the following functionality: the ability to search, find pages in database, read page content, create new pages, edit existing pages. And for this demonstration, you don't necessarily need to set this up because you might not be using Notion, and it will walk you through it step by step. You might be using a suite of Google tools. You might be using your HubSpot CRM, and therefore this is just a demonstration of what's possible and how it pushes data and pulls data too. So no setup needed for me for Notion. You're good to go. Want to try something? For example, I can search your Notion workspace for a specific page or database. Now, if we go and tell it that we want it to search our YouTube videos, we're going to put in the URL of a video, and we could also, again, take that URL, do the transcript, and you can obviously do this all with Claude Code using various tools, but for now, I'm just manually hacking this together to show that you can pull data from Notion. I'm going to copy that transcript, I'm going to shove it inside here, and we can see that there's two databases. There's an older version and a newer version. Want me to fetch the main database and see its contents and structure? Yes, YouTube video is most recent, and it will now go, because it's got the search query on the MCP. It's queried like for YouTube videos and found the database basically. So I don't need to go and tell it exactly where it is. It says it's got video title, URL, and transcript. It's a simple table view with those three columns. Want me to search within it for a specific video or do something else with it, like add entries. So take the most recent video and repurpose the content. You see where this is going. So basically, we're going to find the transcript. It's going to know to grab the transcript, and it's going to push that transcript hopefully into our skill and start repurposing. Now I could obviously also actually put in a new property here. Let's do the LinkedIn post. Once you're done with repurposing it, make sure the LinkedIn post is actually appended to the LinkedIn post column in that same YouTube videos table on Notion. And I'll queue that message. So now it's going to basically go through, it's used the MCP to pull data. It's now using the skill, and now we're going to push data back to the LinkedIn post column, hopefully. And you can see how you start to make workflows inside the apps you actually work with. So Claude Code is taking actions where you work, and all you have to do is prompt Claude Code in this interface. Super, super powerful. Okay, and now it's basically saying it's done the run through with the skills. Now you also asked me to append the LinkedIn post to a LinkedIn post column. So when it initially pulled the table, it didn't have this LinkedIn post column. So do you want me to add a LinkedIn post property to the database, or is there an existing column elsewhere I should use? I'll say check again. The column now exists. So it's checking with me before it actually takes that action for the right column. And it will now put the LinkedIn post into this column here. So you can see it's now using the fetch. It's fetching the latest table. It's found the column, and now it's going to update the page, and we'll be able to see it appear in this LinkedIn post here, hopefully. And there we go. You can see it now inside here. Variation A, variation B, all created from that video title, the URL, and the transcript inside there, but actually generated through our use inside of Claude Code. So we've spoken to it and it's interacted with our apps, both read and put back into our apps, which is brilliant. So MCP servers, a super easy way, unified way to interact with all of our different apps. You can go to a service like mcp.so and figure out with almost any app, because users can create their own MCP servers, how to interact with it, whether that's pulling data or pushing data, all in a unified way. And Claude Code can basically set you up how to get the right credentials to run through and set this up for yourself. You saw that with Notion just there. Now, the next section is about plugins. So everything we've seen so far, hooks, skills, / commands, we haven't seen agents yet, but we'll come to that. A plugin is just a bundle of that. So think of a plugin as an easy way to install multiple of these at once into one installable package. So you can run one line and you get a bunch of skills, a bunch of hooks, a bunch of / commands that all work together. But a warning here, you only want to install plugins you've actually looked inside and you can understand, because of the same reasons we've mentioned before. Context is so important that you don't want to bloat the context of Claude. And therefore, anything you're installing, whether it be skills, plugins, hooks, / commands, you should always read it and understand exactly what's going inside it. You can actually use, I'm going to open a fresh terminal here, a / plugin command inside here to see what Claude Code plugins you have installed. But you can also go through and discover them from popular entries in the marketplace. So you can see there's 72 plugins just by typing in / plugin. And you can go through these and say, okay, I want a front-end design plugin, and that's got 455,000 installs. But you need to understand by Googling it exactly what comes as part of that plugin. I personally never install any plugins myself. I'm keen to keep my context as clean as possible and build everything out using the skills that we've mentioned so far. Now, we already talked about planning earlier, but let's build out now why planning actually matters and some frameworks apart from the built-in plan mode that you can use to build out better plans. And I'm going to reiterate the context of why planning is so important with an example of how you used to interact with chatbots and ChatGPT. So you used to ask the chatbot a question and you'd get a single response back. So there was effectively nothing to plan, right? It was going out and it was answering a query. You typed, you got an answer, you moved on to the next query. But because Claude Code is an entirely different beast, it can take actions, it can build entire applications actually, and wire up your MCPs to your Notion, etc., and even run for hours on a single given task. The more capable the tools get, the more we have to invest in upfront planning so that we don't hit the issue of context rot or context degradation as we go through, so we can pass in the right context at the right time. That's why we plan. We want to just keep Claude focused, keep it on the right task at the right time, and that's all done through context planning or planning frameworks, basically. So it's all about giving Claude smaller, well-defined tasks at the right time, so it runs those tasks with a clean context. So a written plan survives when Claude's memory does not survive. And there's kind of 3 levels of planning. The first one we've touched already, which was plan mode. I'd use this for anything under an hour. It's built into Claude Code. Like we saw earlier, shift tab twice, you see plan mode is on down here. Now level 2, and these, by the way, are just opinions. You can actually use whatever framework you want. But level 2, I would use something called a PRD generator. So it's going to generate a structured requirements doc, which you can use for multi-hour projects. And then level 3, my favorite planning framework for this is the GSD framework, or Get Shit Done framework, which I've talked about in previous videos too. I love this framework, and I think this is the most comprehensive and best way to plan, but you pay for it in the amount of tokens it uses and also the time it takes to execute each phase, but it does it really well. So you're basically matching the framework to the size of the work. Plan mode for small tasks, PRD generator for multi-hour projects, GSD framework for full application builds, multi-day builds, basically. Now, a PRD document is a product requirements document, and it's effectively used by product managers, product teams, engineers sometimes too. And it's the foundational document created by product teams to define the purpose, the features, the functionality, and the user requirements effectively of whatever we're building out. So in a good PRD, we'll see a project overview, tech stack recommendations, decisions about architecture, feature breakdown, acceptance criteria, order of operations. So step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. And I've actually got one I'd recommend. We can go to this GitHub repo here. It's linked. It's called PRD-Taskmaster. And basically, like we did with the plan mode earlier, you can just tell Claude what you want to build. The skill, which is this, is going to activate automatically, and it's going to interview you using that Ask User Questions feature, and it will basically generate us a product requirements document, which we can then start building off. And we can tell Claude to just look in the spec.md or the PRD.md and build and go through and update that plan as we go through. And that GitHub repo didn't work, so let me just Google that. If you Google AnonByte 93 PRD Taskmaster, we're going to go into the GitHub repo here. It's not a very well-known repo, but it's one that I quite enjoy. It's got 181 stars, but it's an AI-powered PRD generation, and we can install it locally exactly the same as we had before. So you can copy this installation line, and we can add the local flag too, or we can manually clone it into our GitHub, into our repo. And what this skill effectively does is run a 12-step workflow. It checks for existing work, offers options, asks 12 detailed questions about the problem, the user, the metrics, initializes Taskmaster. So it's going to set up a directory structure, creates a comprehensive PRD, so the document, validates the quality. So it's going to go over 13 automated checks that go over the PRD, sets up tracking scripts. So it's going to track time, rollback, security audit, execution state, and then it's going to generate a Claude.md workflow guide for your project if one doesn't already exist. And you can see that this is the folder structure it's going to set up. So we're going to have a PRD.md, the architecture.md, a bunch of scripts that do date time tracking per task. Therefore, we can roll back to any checkpoint. So this is way more comprehensive than the inbuilt planning mode, as you'll see. It's then going to go and grade the quality validation based on these 13 automated checks. And you can see it will implement basically when we install it as the PRD Taskmaster folder with all of these reference files as well as the skill.md inside there. So we're going to grab that command. We're going to go back to a fresh terminal. We're just going to append the flag local on the end, and had some issues with that. So like everything, we can either go to Claude Code or go to Claude or ChatGPT. I always struggle with these simple like flags of local, of just understanding these installation commands. So if you do too, that's absolutely fine. I'm not the most technical person in the world, but I can know my way around a few things. So, okay, so we're going to download, inspect, and then run. So let's clear that terminal. We're going to paste it. And actually, we're going to clone the whole repo instead. And it should clone, if we paste that in, clone into our PRD Taskmaster, which we can actually move inside our skills folder. And now we have the PRD Taskmaster skill, and that skill has access to all of these different scripts, reference documents, companion skills, everything inside there. And you need to make sure you run the ./install.sh. And then it says to use this skill now it's installed, use /PRD Taskmaster. So when we run the install line, it just installs any relevant things that we need to also install. So it's installed the script, installed the templates, installed the reference, and it's all in the right place now. So let's start a new instance of Claude Code. And now if we use /PRD Taskmaster, you can see that I've installed it twice, once globally, once locally. And I can now just initiate that, and it will basically run through the Claude.md for that skill, or run through the skill.md rather, and it will go through the pre-flight checks and then ask me what I'm trying to build out. And what it will then do is build out the plan for that. So we're not going to go through the full spectrum of building out that plan because you've seen exactly what it can produce, but it's saying no existing PRD found. You need to install Taskmaster. So it gives you some options for that. We can just install it through the terminal. You see all of these things guide you through the installation process. So they're very simple. You don't need to be technical. It gives you options and you just run through the installation process. And then what it's going to do is go through and quiz us on the PRD that we need to build out. And then when we try to execute, we're not going to be worried about the context window filling up, because actually all execution phases are going to be executed against the plan. They're going to update the plan. And then when looking back on it, even if we run out of context here, it will be able to understand the state of where it's at and then validate against the plan too. So the main thing you need to take away from this is there's different levels of planning. This is kind of the middle ground planning, where it creates a plan for us, and Claude Code can therefore execute against the plan. So then that would come back and ask us a bunch of questions once we've installed the correct stuff. it would generate a PRD, and yeah, the PRD can then be executed. Okay, there we go. Step 4, discovery questions. So now it would go on and ask us those 12 questions to define our requirements. But what would happen if you needed something that was even more comprehensive? If you were doing a multi-day application build, you were building out a complete application with a front end, a dashboard, payments, a SaaS app, for example, in which case I would actually then go one step further and use what's called the GSD framework. And again, you can do whatever you want. You can use whatever planning framework you want, but this get shit done framework, which you can install by using this command line, add -- local to it if you want, installs basically a 3-command workflow where it goes through a similar process and will define for us, based on a bunch of questions, a PRD document or the equivalent of a PRD document. It's not necessarily called a PRD document. I think it's called a roadmap or requirements document. And then per phase, so it'll break down the project into multiple phases. Per phase, we can go through a 3-command workflow. So again, what we would do, if I just exit this and start a new Claude Code instance, I've just got an alias up here. CLD means Claude Code start with dangerously skip permissions. That's why you can see bypass permissions on. It's just my testing mode. What you can see is once you've installed GSD in that way, you can type in /GSD and it's got all the commands down here. And what you'd effectively do is go through each phase, and you'd go through plan phase and you'd say, I want to plan phase 1, I want to plan phase 2, plan phase 3, whatever. And then once you've got a plan for that, which is separated into a separate document, you would go through and execute phase 1. And then you would go through what's called a verification phase. So it gives you some manual steps to go through and verify your work of phase 1. So it will give you some manual steps. Say you have a front end with some buttons on. It will say, go to this page, press this button, confirm it does exactly what it's supposed to. But it also has some automated checks built into that. So this was built by a guy called Tash. It's an extremely powerful GitHub repo. And I have built several bigger applications using this, and I swear by it. It is fantastic, but it is going to use a lot of tokens. You kind of need to go onto the max plan if you don't want to do this over several days. If you want to get a project done on this in one single day, then you're going to have to use the Claude Code max plan or have it be a smaller project. And it's essentially just a planning framework. It puts all of your phases into certain project requirements. So I can give you an example because we've been building out a UI called the Command Center as part of our Agentic Academy. It's a way to manage multiple terminal windows in a business-friendly way. So similar to the Claude desktop app, you're able to basically have conversations with 6 or 7 different agents, run through the GSD planning frameworks, all from one nice, aesthetically pleasing visual interface instead of the terminal. So I've been building that inside the Agentic OS. You can see the .command center in there. But when you are running a GSD project, it basically spawns a .planning folder. And inside that planning folder, you have all the planning documents that we spoke about. So we have a state document, which shows where we're at, total phases, number of completed phases, total plans, number of completed plans. We have a roadmap document. We have a requirements document. And this requirements document, you can see Agentic OS Command Center is built out into the different phases. So we've got the design phase, the infrastructure phase, the board, the execution, the outputs, the detail panel, scheduled tasks, management tabs, all of this stuff that is gone through and said, when it's actually executed on that, we're going to come back and tick the box so that when GSD checks in on that going forwards, it knows what it's done and what is still left. We've got a project.md document. And then per phase, you can actually see the breakdown, and you can see why this is the most comprehensive level of planning, because per phase, we will effectively have a plan, a summary of what was completed, and we can also go ahead and do some research when we're actually going through and planning out that phase. So all of this is effectively to say that GSD is probably the most comprehensive planning framework that I'd highly recommend. Super easy to install. And it basically works by going through and going through that 3 phase where you plan, you execute, and you verify. And you do that on a per phase basis before you move on to the next phase. Most projects are going to be 5 to 8 different phases, but you can do this all at a different level of depth. So you can see actually for this project with a command center, we had design prompts, we had the core loop, we had outputs and monitoring, we had scheduling and management, we had switching between clients, and all of these I was able to go through and verify. And I've actually created a separate video, which I can link to down below, which goes into the GSD framework in more detail and shows you exactly how to use it. But when you look at the docs, it's fairly straightforward. You just use it in the 3 phases that we talked about: GSD, plan, execute, and verify. But you also would start by doing GSD new project, and that would initialize a new project, and then it would go through and create that project.md from your answers. And one thing I didn't show you was inside each of those phases, we have the plan and the summary. So the plan is when we plan it, obviously. So phase 1, wave 1, these are the things that must be true. These are the artifacts that must be made. These are the objectives of phase 1. And then summary is like what was done against that plan. And that is all updated in the higher level documents around state and requirements.md. So hopefully you can see with these 3 levels of planning how comprehensive these are versus just using Claude Code's built-in plan mode. The harder the task, the more context you need to isolate. And that's why using planning frameworks is one of the most powerful things you can do when you're using Claude Code in your business on a day-to-day basis. So use plan mode when you're doing like super quick builds. If you've got multi-hour projects, use the PRD generator or something similar. And GSD is like multi-day builds. So don't make the mistake of jumping straight into building with no plan at all. That is a critical mistake that's going to just reduce the quality of your outputs. But the other mistake is don't use GSD for everything, because it uses a lot of tokens and it's going to take a long time. Don't use it for something that's going to take less than an hour. So match the planning framework to the size of your work. Now, we've spent the whole course talking about everything but agents. And agents are a really important thing to understand in Claude Code. But I've got some controversial opinions around the use of agents, sub-agents, and teams. So I'll explain them at a high level so that you understand what exactly they are and how you might use them. But in my honest opinion, you can see inside my Agentic OS, I don't have any agents in the .claude folder. I've just got a blank folder in agents. So agents sit within the .claude folder, much like skills and commands. Ignore the fact my hooks are in here. And effectively, we've been working with agents. You might not know it, but we've been working with agents. So every new terminal I start up here and I start a new Claude Code instance, this is effectively an agent. And the context that we're feeding into the agent is from the Claude.md, which is effectively our system prompt, where we're giving it certain instructions to adhere to. And that's fed in the background into this Claude.md. When I work then inside the content engine folder and I open a new terminal inside that, so I CD into the content engine folder, it then takes also the context of the Claude.md, as we know, because of the parent inheritance from that content agent. So effectively, our Claude.md acts as our agent context, and one terminal, one conversation is basically a single agent. Now, Claude Code also and Anthropic have brought out sub-agents, which are effectively specialists with their own context. So the idea of these sub-agents is you can hand off tasks and just not worry about those agents. They're specialists and they can bring back the results of those agents. So they're kind of best for self-contained jobs. And Anthropic has some sub-agents built in. We've seen one of them already quite a lot, which is the planning agent. So it has access to only read-only tools. It does not have access to write. So we saw earlier when we were actually going through a plan and making a plan, it spun off that sub-agent, which was basically just had access to plan and come back with a structured plan. So it knows from its own Claude.md, although we can't see it in our repository on the left-hand side, it knows to come back with a plan in a certain format, tick certain things off when it's planning, go and do certain bits of research, and then come back to us. They also have a built-in explore agent and a built-in general purpose agent. So these are the agents that will kind of activate automatically whenever we ask Claude to do a job that invokes anything that needs an explore, a plan, or a general purpose agent. So these are all spun off with their own set of subcontexts. So that's really important, and you should need to understand that, because whenever we type something in here and we're filling up the context window like this, we're adding tokens to the context and we can see the context window and context bar filling up. Whenever it spins out a sub-agent like a planning agent, and we'll demonstrate again using the plan mode, help me plan a SaaS app or content repurposing, we'll see that it will split out that sub-agent that will go off with its own context It will basically pull sections from the Claude.md. It will pull sections from various bits it needs from the context and throw that into a new set of contexts that's just isolated and specialist to go and do that specific job. You can see it's now doing the explore sub-agent. So it's spinning off a separate agent that's just going to go and explore existing project files. It will then do the plan agent, and it will pass that plan agent certain bits of context, like from our Claude.md, what we've done so far, the files that we've got. And you can just think of these as specialists with their own context. They're going to hand off tasks. You can, of course, build your own sub-agents. And the way you do that is actually similar to the way you build skills. Inside .claude, you'd have an agents folder. And inside that folder, you have a set of documents that gives an agent a specific remit, like you have access to these tools, you can do these things, and you follow this specific set of requirements. So exactly the same in which we build the skills out with a skill.md, which is our process document, and then a references file with additional information it can access. But agents, on the other hand, have access to certain tools, like the explore, it can go and read things. The general purpose can write things, and then the plan agent can only read things too. Now, there's two reasons, and we've got this inside the module in the school community, that you'd use sub-agents. The first is to improve output quality. So think delegating to a focus specialist instead of using a generalist. And that's because you can get an agent to basically master their own domain with deep knowledge and context that isn't bloated. It's got its own set of context. It's got its own set of instructions. And the second thing is you can do things faster. So if you have multiple terminals open at the same time doing different tasks that are totally unrelated, you can speed up your workflow. So if you want to do 4 or 5 different tasks, you just open 4 or 5 different terminals. They're all considered different agents here that you can converse with. The problem then becomes actually managing multiple of those terminals, but that's an entirely separate issue. And then if you take a look at this diagram, we have like a pictorial representation of sub-agents. So we have the main agent, which is our main conversation window, which is what we're seeing here. This is our main window that we're talking about. And then it will delegate to specialist sub-agents like the explore agent, like the planning agent, which we will talk to in a moment. And those specialist sub-agents can pass information back to the main agent. However, once you've got 4 or 5 of these working with the main agent, you have basically a lot of context being passed to the main agent, and you start to bloat the context, and it gets a little bit confusing for the main agent if you're trying to do big tasks in this manner. That is why Claude introduced a concept called agent teams. And the biggest difference here, apart from the token usage, because you see there's a lot more arrows going between multiple phases here, which means more tokens, more collaboration, more communication, is that the main agent can talk to the teammates, but the teammates can also talk to each other. So they can share a task list here. They all talk to the task list, so they know what each other are doing, and they're all able to talk amongst each other as well as to the main agent too. So similar to sub-agents, teams of agent get their own context, and they can basically operate as individual teammates doing a certain task. So a good example, if you're building out a SaaS app, of some tasks you need a main agent, some tasks that would benefit from agent teams would be if you had a front-end developer, a back-end developer, and a testing developer. And a testing developer, for example, would need to test things that have been created by the front-end developer. They would need to test things that have been created by the back-end developer. So you could spin this off as a set of sub-agents, but actually it'd be more effective and quicker to spin this up as an agent team, because then the testing agent could actually talk directly and understand which features have been created now by the front end, by the back end, and that would all be populated in that shared task list. And you can see it's now asking us questions to try and build out that plan, which I'm just going to quit because we don't actually want to create the plan. Now, the controversial opinion that I mentioned, which you're probably wondering about sub-agents, agent teams, and single agents, is that in the way that I've set up something like the Agentic OS or a business operating system, we can basically house multiple clients inside this operating system. And we dig down when we want to work for that client, like on a project for that client, we go into that client's folder and we specifically work inside that client folder. Now, the way that we've set up the Agentic OS main project folder and then individual client folders means that all of these, their own Claude.md file, which are effectively agents that are specific to that client. Now, the way in which Anthropic describe agents is setting up agents specific for research, specific for planning, specific for exploring. Now, the way in which we use skills, and we used skills earlier, is exactly the same way in which Anthropic treats agents. So in my opinion, I would set this up where we have effectively no agents inside here, but instead we have individual clients that have their own Claude.md file, which is effectively our agent context. And then each of those has access to the set of skills that the Agentic OS has access to. So each set of agent context is our Claude.md. That is the personality of that specific client's agent, or our business or our project agent. You can treat clients like different projects here. And then what we have is basically the skills, which are the standard operating procedures to get things done to a high degree of quality, which is effectively how Anthropic are looking at agents. They just have agents with a specific personality, with access to specific skills, specific tools, etc. So hopefully that you followed that, because I know it was a bit confusing, but effectively you can use agents, agent teams inside Claude Code, but I would actually just stick, especially if you're starting out, with just using one terminal window or multiple terminal windows and leveraging the sub-agents that are already built into Claude Code for planning, exploring, and general purpose too. Now, if you did want to test out more complex agent teams, this is a feature that's still in research preview, but what you need to do in your .claude/settings/.json, this file here, you need to actually add this line here, Claude Code experimental agent teams. And then when you're actually creating a prompt, you need to ask it to create an agent team. Now I'll link to a separate video where I go over actually agent teams and show you how to use them if you want to dig into that in more detail. But when you actually ask it to create an agent team, it's going to create it on the fly and decide, or you tell it what team members you want, and you can actually converse with each of those team members individually. And I've got some instructions here on navigating between different teammates too, if you wanted to use that. Now we're just going to quick fire through some of the most important concepts that have been released in the early quarter of 2026, starting with /loop. So whenever you've been using Claude Code, you start to wonder, like, how can I abstract myself away from the terminal? I don't want to be sat here all day actually invoking / commands, invoking certain tasks. I basically want things to just run as workflows on repeat for me. And there is a feature called /loop, which, as it sounds, basically continues to loop on your system to do recurring tasks. So it's built into Claude Code as long as you're up to date, and you can invoke it using /loop. And it says run a prompt or / command on a recurring interval. So you can actually go and say every 30 minutes, check if my school link has changed description, and I'll do school.com/scrapes. And if I hit loop, it's basically going to create in my system, in my project, a set of commands that are going to run and check its run. It's going to run every 30 minutes. So there we go, passing interval equals 30 minutes. It's got a prompt. It's going to be 30 minutes. So it's created a cron expression, which is basically just an interval at which it's going to run. And now it's going to use an inbuilt tool called cron create to schedule that. And it's basically going to say every 30 minutes, I'm going to check school link and see if the description has actually changed. And the expiry, if we leave this open, is 3 days. So right now, this is the biggest limitation of /loop, but basically it expires automatically after 3 days. So this is for short running tasks. Maybe you want for the next few days to check a certain thing, like has a new YouTube video been released on my channel? And then if you close this terminal, it's basically going to stop that loop from happening. Or you can use cron delete with the job X to actually go and cancel that job. So I can say use cron delete with job ID, and it's going to cancel that cron session. But this is important to note because it's basically a step towards scheduled workflows where we could basically input a prompt and have multiple things run in sequence, multiple of our skills. So say all of the things we talked about earlier in a workflow where we have a YouTube video that's published, we send it to a skill or a tool that gives us a YouTube transcript. That YouTube transcript is then put through our content repurposing skill. We then connect to the MCPs of LinkedIn, Twitter to actually put those posts directly in our draft folders on LinkedIn and Twitter for us to go and review on platform. So you can see how these start to piece together and how /loop is a starting point for scheduled workflows like that. So right now it's not super powerful because it's only for short running tasks every couple of days. Actually, you can force it to actually extend this after 3 days. So after 3 days, it will ignite the loop here, and that is a way around it. But what we're trying to look at inside our community as well is how to do these on a scheduled task basis where actually you don't need to auto renew it every 3 days. It just runs on in the system in the background, and you can even get to the point where you don't need to have the session open to do so. But for the /loop feature, you actually need the session to stay open. If I delete this session, then it's basically going to remove that job from happening in the first place. And you can see if we use the cron delete, that's an inbuilt function to cancel that cron job there. Now, the next one is git Worktrees. So this is a super powerful feature. It means if we start multiple terminal sessions, which by the way, you can start side by side by hitting this little button over here. We start multiple terminal sessions like this. We might want to work on several features of a project or several projects in isolation from each other. So if you have several projects going on, you don't want them to like overwrite each other, work on the same branch. So when it comes to GitHub, it has this feature called Worktrees, and Worktrees are effectively just a copy of your branch somewhere else, a copy of your GitHub repository, our version control system, i.e. all the files on the left, somewhere else. So we can basically start Claude in a separate work tree. So we can just use the -w or -work tree, and we can say that we want to work on feature 1. And it's given me the error message, can only use work tree in a GitHub repository. So we've not actually set up a GitHub repository for projects Claude Code, but I do have one set up, and you can just ask Claude to set one up for an area where you do have a GitHub repository installed. So I'm going to CD into my Agentic OS where I know I've got a GitHub repository, and then you can actually see inside the Agentic OS, inside .claude, inside Worktrees, if I start a new work tree, so we'll try it again, click that Claude-W feature 1, and we'll also CD here into Agentic OS, Claude-W feature 2, do the same over here, you get the point, Claude-W feature 3, and it's basically spinning up a separate work tree, you can see that here, .claude/worktrees/feature 2, and you can see that feature 1, feature 2, and soon feature 3 will appear in our work trees here. And inside that, we've got a complete copy of all of the different files inside the Agentic OS. And the brilliant part about this is it's basically an isolated copy of your project. It's got all the Git history, it's separated all the files, and any change you make does not go directly into your main repository until you're happy with it, until you've experimented with it. So it basically allows you to actually version control and create features and merge them into your main repository when it's suitable and you've tested things to do so. And the best thing about this is if I quit each of these sessions, so feature 1, for example, I'll quit, the feature 1 work tree, because there's been no changes, will automatically delete from this feature 1 Worktrees folder up here. However, if there are any changes, then it will basically, when I try to quit it, try to merge the changes and tell me if there are any things that need to be merged with our main repository. So it's just a way to actually isolate separate copies of your repository so that we can experiment with multiple features. And we're just going to remove these work trees by quitting 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see they will remove themselves from the work trees there. Now remove those terminals. We can use /clear to clear the context of an old conversation, and then we can now talk about remote control. So the reason I'm mentioning it in this course is Claude is heading in the direction of being able to access Claude Code from anywhere. So this is a really important concept. Now, right now it's with remote control, and there's several other ways in which you can access it from other apps. So not necessarily through Claude Code, but you can actually talk to it through Telegram, through Discord. But the concept is what I'm mentioning here, which is working from anywhere. So the ability to actually start an agent from anywhere you are. And the easiest way to do this is the remote control feature. So we can do /remote control. We can give it a name if we want. And then, or we can start it with Claude RC. We basically get a URL that we can open, or we can basically ask it for a QR code. And that means that we can send instructions from our phone. Claude is going to execute it on our computer, and then the file is never going to leave the machine. So it can change files on our machine through doing this. And yeah, if we type in /remote control again, we can have the option to show QR code. We can then obviously go into that session on our mobile phone. It's loading up the session, and I can see the conversation history on my phone here. And I'm going to just send a test message. Hey, just testing this. And you can see that has now appeared on the screen. So I can see everything on my phone from this session. So you can see the remote control is now active. You can only connect one session, as far as I'm aware, at a time to this, but this is really powerful when you're doing long running projects. You want to change things in your directory, but you actually just want to run off on your phone on a walk and actually activate this stuff directly from your phone and not be sat at your laptop. So we're going to close that session, and then it's basically stopped the session on my phone so nobody can contact that going forwards. Now, you will sometimes want to revisit conversations. So this is just a quick hack that I've seen a lot of people use in the past that I thought would be worth sharing inside this course. So if we start up our Claude Code instance again, you basically have a conversation history, which you saw earlier from the way we could just resume conversations. So what you can actually do is ask Claude to search your past Claude Code conversations, much in the same way that you have ChatGPT history and it can look at your previous conversations, or Claude.ai history. All that conversation history lives in your global Claude folder. So you can always go back and actually resume sessions. So the way I'd actually do this instead of asking this, which you can do, is actually just type in, sorry, I did that wrong. Actually, don't start a new instance, typing Claude -- resume. So the resume flag. And what we'll be able to see if we zoom in is it's going to load up our previous conversations. You can see the conversation we just had where we did, hey, just testing this. And then actually we've got all of the conversations that we've had. We can even hit Control A to get all of the conversations in the last 50 conversations. And I can go back and actually search up here for the conversations, and anyone I want to open, I can just actually open those directly. So just a quick hack that will help you actually resume previous conversations so that you can pick up context where it left off. Now, if you hadn't gathered by this point, the importance of loading in the right context at the right time is probably the third thing that you should take away from this course. So we had the most important thing was the Claude.md, which are like our system prompt. The second thing was how to use skills, how to build your own skills. And actually we built those out with an example of a content repurposing system and how I'd actually build that out. And then the third thing is the importance of context and the planning frameworks that we did in section 3, which were all about preserving context and injecting context at the right time to get higher quality outputs. Now, with all of those learnings you've got from this course, you are now equipped to go out and actually start on your own projects, to start experimenting a bit, to build out your own skills. So I've got a set of next steps of where to start on your own projects and some kind of hot tips, big quick takes from everything we've covered so far. So the first one is don't forget about the Claude.md and planning mode. So if you're going to do one thing, make sure that you write that Claude.md using the framework that we covered and use plan mode before you execute. If you're not going to do any other type of planning framework of the more complicated ones like the PRD generator or the GSD framework, then make sure to use the built-in plan mode and do not skip the planning stage because it's going to dramatically improve the quality of your outputs. Go ahead and build one skill using that 6-step framework. Have a look at how to actually name those descriptions, because the first challenge is activating the skill. The second challenge is actually building a good skill with good skill.md process files and then reference material it can actually point back to. And do this for a task that you do every single week. Build the skill, use it for a week. You can use the skill creator skill that we installed earlier to actually help you build those out. I'd recommend trying to just connect to one MCP. So whichever tool you use the most, whether that's Notion or Gmail, don't go into that tool and copy paste your inputs back in there. Try to connect it up and actually interact with that app, with that data using Claude Code. If you want to, you can experiment with sub agents and teams and creating your own agents. And I'll leave the link to the agent teams video where you can actually see how to set up your own agents like that. But I'd highly recommend actually starting with just the skills and starting with the Claude.md. Don't touch agents if you're fairly new to this. And we've already talked about how important context is and keeping Claude.md and the skills sharp. And I just want to re-emphasize that skills, the Claude.md, agents and planning, all of this is not about removing human work and the human touch. They're about removing parts of the work that aren't really human, the stuff that you have to do that's repetitive, the formatting, the platform specific rewriting, the boring grunt work. The reason that you've probably sought after something like Claude Code is actually you want to remove all those boring elements that are time sucks from your day. And what's left when you take that away is the part that actually needs you, the strategic decisions, the creativity, the relationship with your audience, building out a brand voice that fits you. And Claude Code can effectively help you build all that material and take away your grunt work day to day. It is a phenomenal tool, and I'm sure there'll be tools that come after it. But for now, this is probably the flagship of everything in the market, and it is phenomenal, and you'll be blown away as you start to use it for your use cases. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for getting to this point. If you want to check out our complete agentic operating system, which we've referenced a couple of times in this course, then make sure to check out the community linked in the description below. The idea of the agentic operating system, it has all your business context in one place. Some of the things that we referenced today around business context, like brand voice, etc., it spins up all of that context for your business in around 10 minutes by asking you a few questions. You've got skill packages out the box. So things for operational tasks, content creation, marketing, all of that stuff comes out the box. And we also have an extension on some of the topics that we've covered in the course today. So make sure to check that out if you're interested in learning more. And also please comment and like the video. It really helps my reach. So tell me what you're going to build. Tell me how far you got in the course, what's confusing, what stuff you actually learned today that you hadn't seen elsewhere. I'd really love to see those comments, and I read and reply or try to reply to every one of those. So thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one. If you're interested, by the way, in the Agentic OS, I'll link to that video next so you can see exactly what we've built out there and how this extends on everything you've learned today.